Om Mahamaye Jaganmataha Kalike Ghora Dakshine Grihana Vandanam Devi Namaste Parameshwari. Om, salutations to that goddess who is the supreme sovereign in this universe, that cosmic ruler, who is the mother of all, who is the awe-inspiring, terrific Kali. Salutations to her. Om Grihana Vandanam Mata Sada Vijayavardinihi Pada Padmam Sada Vande Sthanam Dehi Padambuje. Om, salutations to her who is ever victorious, that divine mother. May I remain forevermore at thy lotus feet. I praise thy lotus feet. Om Shrimat Sura Radhya Charanamburuhadvayam Charachara Jagadhatrim Kalikam Pranamamyaham. You are the ground of all reality, the upholder of the world. You who are wholly immanent in the moving and unmoving, the sentient and insentient. I bow again and again at thy holy feet. Om Sthapakaya cha dharmasya sarvadharma swarupine avatara varishtaya Ramakrishnaya te namaha. Om yathagner dahika shakti Ramakrishne sthita hiya sarva vidya swarupam tam saradam pranamamyaham. Om, you who are the embodiment of all the vidyas, Kali, Tara, Shodashi, Bhuvaneshwari, Bhairavi, Chinnamastaka, Dhumavati, Bagala, Matangi, Kamala, and others, you who are embodied as all the gods and goddesses, may this be an offering at your lotus feet. Om Namah Shri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Suraye Satchit Sukha Swarupaya Swamine Tapaharine Swamine Tapaharine. May this be an offering to Swami Vivekananda. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu. Jaima, Jaima. Good evening, one and all. So we've been having these conversations recently, incredibly, I think, nuanced conversations, if I may say so myself, on the topic of free will and determinism. These are very heavy and very important topics because it has to do with the problem of evil. Insofar as you want to accept theism, that is the idea that there is indeed God, and that God is the creator, maintainer, and destroyer of the universe, then you have to wrestle with a very, very difficult philosophical problem. In fact, this problem is so philosophically challenging that it's one of the main arguments for rejecting God wholesale. And the argument goes like this. Clearly, you look around, you see suffering. Clearly in the world, there is such a thing as suffering. On a macrocosmic level, obviously, it's happening environmentally, as Kuleshwari was pointing out. You like immediately become aware of this fact whenever you watch nature documentaries. It's like horrific. People are always like, "Oh, nature, it's so beautiful, it's so sweet. Let's go out into nature." Hooray! It's a slaughterhouse out there where parents are eating their own children, and out of scarcity, horrible things occur, but also great miracles and great kindnesses are done. And when you're faced with the whole of it, you feel the problem of evil in nature. That there's just so much death and entire civilizations of bacteria, at the very least, if not entire species of animals, are just wiped out like that in a blink of an eye because of some ecological disaster or some sort of thing like that. So there's horrors in nature, and then there's horrors on the political scale and the social scale and the economic scale. So much like in the David Attenborough documentary where all these animals are dying horrific deaths, you look on the news and you see the same thing. Obviously, the news has a certain bias, of course, to depict the most horrible things all of the time. But even then, when you look around you and you can see all these riots are breaking out and people are dying and being shipped off to here or shipped off to there, and there are holocausts occurring on many levels in different communities for different reasons. And all around we are confronted with that fact, if only we bother to look. What to say of the great immensity of personal microcosmic suffering? We, each and every one of us, will get old, will get sick, will die. Many of us have already lost loved ones. Many of us will lose loved ones. Nobody wishes for that. And yet it is the embedded fact of this embodied existence that there will be great loss and great grief naturally, and also all manner of ailments on the level of the body and on the level of the mind. So never mind like environmental, sociological, political, or economical tragedy. It's enough to simply take your own personal tragedy into consideration. And when you're faced with all of this, naturally the only question you can ask is, why, God, why? Elahi, Elahi, lama sabachthani. Father, Father, why hast thou forsaken me? It's like the only natural and spontaneous question that you could possibly ask when faced with all this horror and tragedy. And not just that, but also like the hypocrisies of life, like for instance, you come to spirituality looking for truth. But then you find that spiritual communities are rooted in just as much falsehood, if not more so, than the rest of the world. We look to religious leaders and spiritual teachers for some solace. We look to them for some direction, and then we find, oh my God, they're just as complicated and messed up like the rest of us. And that's disappointing and horrific. So there's like that problem also. And Shiva, Jaima, Jaima, I missed you so much. So good to see you, Ma. Jaima, 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 Jaima. Kali, Kali. Jaima. So, like, this question must come to our lips sooner or later, insofar as we accept God, insofar as we are atheist. And you know what? Even if we aren't, like anybody anywhere in this world, regardless of their stance with regards to metaphysics, whether they're a theist or a non-theist, an agnostic or an atheist, like whatever the case may be, they're going to ask why. They might not phrase it in this way, why, Father, why? But they might say, oh my God, why is this happening to me? It's so unfair. The world is so unjust. They demand an explanation for what's going on. And so these conversations about free will and determinism are very important in answering this question. If indeed God exists, and if indeed God is all powerful, as is implied by the word God, and if indeed all God is all benevolent, as indeed most theists claim, then how do you explain evil? Why do I see evil in the world? Why is there personal evil? Why is there ecological, economical, sociological, and political evil? And why does it seem so prevalent? Like what's up with that? If indeed God is all powerful and also all good. Either it means God is not all powerful because, maybe God wanted to do something, but she couldn't. She was like unable to because maybe the devil like beat her to it or something. So if indeed God is not all powerful and there is some other figure like the demiurge or the devil or something like that, then okay, then we can accept this. But who wants to accept a God who is not all powerful? In that case, might as well worship the demiurge or the devil or something. If there is indeed a power other than God, which is at the very worst equal to God, or most likely better and more powerful than God, given the prevalence of evil, then might as well just worship that. So if you want to maintain God, you have to maintain God's like omnipotence. God is all powerful, the absolute being who creates, maintains, and destroys the world. Then you have to give up God's benevolence. Then you have to say, oh, okay, there's evil in the world. God exists and God is powerful, but everything is happening by the will of God. And you know what? It's inscrutable. So you can retreat into a position of skeptical theism, it's called, where you just like throw up your hands and you're like, who can understand the will of God? It's inscrutable. It's like if I watch a really great chess player, maybe they make moves that at first seem absolutely terrible. Like maybe Magnus Carlsen like sacrifices his queen in the first 10 moves or something. And then Gukesh does something even crazier. And then you have to step back and say, these idiots! What idiots? Who would do that? That's such a stupid thing to do. Of course, you'll say that because you're not like a brilliant chess player. Maybe you know something of chess, but you're not like a brilliant chess player. And then later, you see that it made perfect sense. That actually it made sense for Magnus to sacrifice his queen in the first 10 moves. Because in the end game, there was like a purpose to it all. He saw where it was going in a way that you couldn't. So people make this argument about God. God obviously being omnipotent and omniscient and whatnot. Obviously, like the ability of God to understand all outcomes, to see the big picture, is beyond our puny little human intellect to comprehend. So therefore, we have to say like, okay, maybe these things look evil, but that's only because I'm seeing them so close up. If I were to zoom out, if I were to take a God's eye view, if you will, everything would check out in the end. But that doesn't, it's scant comfort, When you're actually suffering, when you're actually faced with the problem of evil, it's very hard to say, oh, it's all for the greater good. It'll all check out in the end. You know how they say the math, it checks out? The math checks out. Like, okay, maybe at the end of all of this, I'll look back and I'll say it checks out. But what about now? What about when I'm faced with the problem of evil? This answer that God is all good and all powerful, but just in a way that I cannot understand, doesn't seem to really do it for us. So we have to somehow justify God's power, omnipotence, and also God's goodness, which seems like a paradox given the prevalence of evil. And so always the necessary kind of go-to answer from the theistic position is free will. See, if God is all powerful and also all good, then God must also respect the sovereignty of individual souls. You know, and Swami Vivekananda in the 1893 paper on Hinduism gave some very brilliant and nuanced arguments about why it is that souls are endless and therefore also beginningless. God could not have created souls because anything that's created can be destroyed. After all, a creation is really, when you look at it, a matter of bringing elements together into some kind of compound. And any compound is sure to come apart sooner or later. If something has a starting point, it must also have an ending point. So you cannot say that God created souls. Because if you say God created souls, then souls are no longer endless or eternal. And most religions in the world, most theistic traditions, will not only say that God is eternal, but they're also going to say that the soul is eternal. But isn't it paradoxical then to posit an endless, beginningless soul? To posit an endless soul which has a beginning? If something has a beginning, how can it be endless? It's mathematical and logically improbable for that to be true. Because after all, if you have an endless progression into the future, that looks almost like a beginningless progression too. If it expands into infinity one way, it also expands into infinity the other way. So the soul is not created by God. It's coextensive with God. It's co-eternal with God. So God is a type of spirit, if you will, that is the absolute reality upon which everything else depends. And the soul is itself a kind of reality which is endless and beginningless. And Swami Vivekananda gives us this simile. He says, if I may use a simile, he says, imagine two lines drawn parallel to one another. That's what it's like. The eternal world, the eternal soul, and the eternal God. So in that case, God didn't create souls. Souls were always there and always will be there. And the thing is, each soul is free to act. It's free to think what it wants to think. It's free to say what it wants to say. It's free to do what it wants to do. And if God is indeed all powerful and all good, God must give the soul space to do just that. Do you know? Because if that weren't true, if that wasn't true, if God wasn't the kind of God to give you space to respect your sovereignty, then that God would be a tyrant. So free will is a very important defense against the problem of evil. Because the reason there is evil is not because of God. God gives souls freedom in order to do whatever they want. And naturally, those actions are going to have consequences. So there is like this inbuilt law of karma. Now, you're very justified in asking, why should it be so? Why should there be such a thing as the law of karma? After all, if God is the creator, maintainer, and destroyer of the world, if God by fiat could end karma, then God should end karma. But maybe God doesn't, because it would be inherently meaningless for a soul to make actions, make decisions without being able to understand and learn from those actions. So you could say then the space that God gives, the kind of respect that God has for our sovereignty and for our free will, and the ability for us to make decisions whose consequences, for better or worse, we have to be able to endure, that's God's goodness. So this free will argument is given. It's very important. Like the Christian tradition relies on it because it absolves God, so to speak, of all the bad stuff that happens in the world. So I used to say this is so negligent of God to create a world and then to allow souls to do whatever the fuck they want. It's like a mother giving you a credit card, some cocaine, and car keys and telling you to have at it. It's negligent because if God is indeed omniscient, then God perfectly understands what's going to happen. And if God understands what's going to happen all the time, then first of all, how can there be any free will? But second of all, if God does know what's going to happen, then God knows perfectly well how we're going to use our free will. And that means she's kind of complicit in it. She's okay with it. She's look, I'm going to give them free will because I'm so good. I have to respect their sovereignty. But I know that they're all going to kill each other and start genocides. And it's all going to be really bad, especially during this Kali Yuga period. I know things are going to get really bad. But okay, it's fine. Because for the greater good of free will, for the respect that we have for the sovereignty of each soul to make its own decisions and learn from those actions based on what consequences those actions produce, for better or for worse. So each soul is given the space to learn through action based on their own sovereignty. They'll learn at their own pace, in their own way. And over the course of innumerable lives, they will finally understand the meaning of their actions and maybe come to make better actions that are conducive to their freedom from the wheel of birth, death, and rebirth. So free will is really important, because it helps theistic positions defend God from the problem of evil. God is not responsible for evil. We are. And why are we solely to blame? Because of free will, because God respects our sovereignty and freedom. So we need free will, right? So that position is important. The only thing the Hindu would add here is the doctrine of karma and reincarnation. And like I was saying at the lecture last week. And like I was saying during the reel today, it's important that we add karma and reincarnation. Otherwise, if a soul was indeed created by God, again, God cannot be absolved of evil. Because you see, some souls are born very poor and others very rich, materially, intellectually, spiritually. Like some people just seem to have an easier time meditating and other people not so much. Some people are born with chemical imbalances that predispose them to certain psychiatric conditions. Like some people are chronically depressed, some people are chronically anxious or have difficulty focusing. They might have an attention deficit disorder of some sort. And other people, they have no such thing. They seem to be perfectly psychologically integrated. They have no psychological impediments. Some people are born crippled, some others physically able. Some are born in mansions with a silver spoon, others are born with nothing to eat. How do you justify that? Obviously, there's partiality in the way certain beings come into this world. Is God to blame? If God indeed created souls, how do you justify the fact that God created some souls rich and some souls poor? Some souls intelligent and some souls mentally impoverished. Other souls spiritually gifted and yet other souls inherently obstacled, if you will. Like, why are some people this way and other people that way? Is it God who did that? If so, the problem of evil persists. Because even if there's free will, why should God start us off at different points of the racetrack? You know, some people are started off at the finish line. Some people are on the wrong racetrack. Why would God put some people here and other people there? So, like, God clearly couldn't have created these souls. God cannot be responsible for our present poverty or our present wealth, for our present physical ability or our lack thereof. God cannot be responsible for our mental issues or lack thereof. You see, God, by giving free will, also necessarily needs to step back in a way and allow us the space to make our own decisions whose consequences might be experienced in this life or in some future life. So that's the basic theory of karma. Like whatever I say, whatever I think, whatever I do, it's an action with a necessary and equal and opposite, if you will, reaction. And I must reap what I sow. So if I sow a thought now, I must reap the effect of that thought, either in this life, and if not in this life, then in some future life. Now it follows from this, then, this is very important, it follows from this that everything that I'm experiencing now, down to the kind of body I have, the kind of mind I have, the kind of hormonal system that I seem to experience, the situation that I find myself in, the country that I'm born into, the parents that I'm born to, the proclivities and interests and dispositions that I experience from day after day. Like all of that, it follows that all of that too is the effect, whose cause was initiated by none other than you in some previous life. You know, in some previous birth. And there have been innumerable births before this one. So in some of those births, I might have been a serial killer. I myself might have been the author of some genocide. Or I might have been a despot. Or at the very least, I must have eaten some other animals, you know, or aggressively assaulted them or something. Obviously, I've had animal births before, and like Kuleshwari was pointing out, when you watch a nature documentary, you see how cruel the animal world is, and how you yourself must have played both roles of predator and prey. Imagine how much karmic debt you have with certain beings. Maybe in one life, you ate that being. Doesn't it stand to reason that now in this life, that being should probably eat you in some way too, just to balance the scales? After all, you're in this sense a debtor. You owe something to that being who is the creditor, who will have to come and collect sooner or later. So that's the theory of karma. It's a very complex web of action and reaction that stretches back into an eternal, beginningless origin. So doesn't that sound a bit like victim blaming? I mean, essentially what we said is that everything that's happening to us in this life was caused by us in some previous lives, with our thoughts, with our words, and with our deeds. I don't think so, actually. A lot of people say, oh my God, this theory of karma and reincarnation is victim blaming. It's not, because there are no victims here. We are responsible for all of our actions. Like everything that happens to me is something that I myself am responsible for. Thank God for that. Because if it weren't that way, if it wasn't that way, then look what we'd have to say instead. If I am not responsible for what's happening to me now, then maybe God is. And we're back to the problem of evil. Then it's God who visits upon me all of these sufferings. It's God who makes one person wealthy and the other person impoverished. It's God who makes one person physically able and another person crippled. Like, it cannot be that way. Insofar as you accept that God is all good and all powerful. Okay, that's the first thing. So if I don't take responsibility for my own action, then God will have to. But let's say we just reject God. Why not? Let's just reject the theory of God. There is no all good, all powerful God. So then this is even worse. Because if you reject the theory of God, and if you reject your own personal authorship for your actions, then what you're left with is a situation of real victimhood. Because then it's all random. If there was no law of cause and effect, if there was no karma and if there was no reincarnation, then everything that's happening to you now is just sort of randomly happening to you. Then there's injustice. God is not to be blamed for it. You are not to be blamed for it. It's just random chance. And if it's just random chance, gone is your agency in determining the future. Because you couldn't determine the present, because the present is not the logical effect of some logical cause, then it's all illogical, irrational chance. And if that's the case, then we're truly fucked. Then we're victims. Because there's nothing I can do now that will guarantee anything in the future. So I might as well just like fuck around and find out, I guess. Because in the future, it'll just be random. Maybe randomly I'll be born a Saudi Arabian prince, or randomly I'll be born a dog in Kolkata, which I think is a very tragic birth. You know, a dog in Varanasi, maybe not so bad. I used to think a dog in America is a good birth because they love their dogs here, sometimes more than their own children. But then now I retreat from that position because they also snip off the balls, right? It's horrific. There's like genital mutilation here in the West. Oh my God, the kind of thing that people do to their animals. I'll take the Varanasi dog birth any day. You know, I'll get to keep my balls there. And people will sort of feed me and do Bhairava puja and worship me and whatnot. So I'll take my Varanasi dog birth. I'd be very happy to be born a dog in Varanasi. That's like not bad karma, you know. But Kolkata dog may be a bit rough. So that being said, it's just random. So like randomly I could be a dog in Kolkata, randomly I could be some Saudi Arabian prince. I don't know which one is better, honestly. But if it's just random, then I'm truly a victim. I'm a victim of the vicissitudes of a mechanistic universe in which all the laws are totally like inexorably random. In that case, I might as well stop doing science because I've ceased to believe in cause and effect. I might as well stop believing logic and reason and rationality because all reasoning is based on cause and effect. And I have to stop acting like I can do anything or know anything, which sounds like a very spiritual position, actually. But for most of us, when we arrive at this conclusion that everything is random, it's all happening by random chance, it actually robs us of our agency. You know, it makes us feel very small and very incapable and wholly at the mercy of this cruel, unreasonable universe. So, a much better theory, actually, and again, it's just a theory. So, if you ask, how do we know, Hritik ji? We don't. You have to remember, above all, you have to remember this: karma and reincarnation is not a religious axiom, it's a theory. It's a theory just based on reasoning, on cause and effect. Interestingly, all the various sects in what do you call it, in the subcontinent, whether they're Buddhistic or Jainistic, whether they're Shaiva or Vaishnava or Shakta, they all have like different theologies. Some of them reject God, but almost all of them accept karma and reincarnation. Isn't that interesting? Like non-theistic, like agnostic, atheistic, theistic traditions, and even the theistic traditions, there's a lot of disagreement between them as to exactly what God is. Is God the efficient cause only, or is God both the efficient and material cause? There are all these philosophical debates between these various communities, but they, on the whole, all of them, with one exception, Charvaka, they almost all of them, except for Charvaka, accept the theory of karma and reincarnation. Isn't that interesting? You don't need to believe in God to believe in this theory. In fact, it's just a theory. And Swami Vivekananda was bold enough to say, if you have a better one, let me hear it. I'll take it. You know, so we hold this doctrine very lightly, by the way, just so you know, it's not a religious axiom. You can't really be sure. When people would ask Sri Ramakrishna about this, you know what he would do? He would literally like shrug his shoulders and he'd be like, I don't know, who knows? It's just something that our shastras say. So on that basis, on the basis of testimony, we can accept it as the most probable theory for what happens. But we don't really actually know, and we don't even have the hubris, we who are of the Indian subcontinent, to claim that we do know. You know, and that's important. So karma and theory is just a theory. It's karma and reincarnation is just a theory. But as far as a theory goes, it has great explanatory power. Insofar as every effect has some previous cause behind it, and every present cause has some future effect in front of it, I can't say that my life is an effect without a cause or a cause without effect. Cause and effect are both inseparable and inescapable parts of one another. So since I am a cause, there must be some effect. And since I am here, I must be the effect of some cause. Given that, the doctrine of free will would be intolerable if it didn't also come with karma and reincarnation. Because then even if I have free will in this life, it doesn't absolve God of the fact that some of us are starting off with a little bit more than others. There's a very nice Chili Pepper song that I like. It's like on the B side of the Stadium Arcadium record. Do you remember that one from 2006? It's one of my favorite Chili Peppers records. And there's like some 35 songs on it or something. It's a huge record. And there's a song on the B side called, I think it's called Turn It Again, I think it's called. And it opens with, some of us are given a little and some of us are given a lot. We've all got to make do with what we've got, or something like that. Anthony opens with this kind of resonation to the doctrine of karma. Not true. Some of us are given a little, some of us are given a lot. But who gave us a little? Who gave us a lot? It cannot be God. Because for God to be all powerful and all good, we must absolve God also of this, of creating some souls this way and other souls that way. So we say, no, it's not God, nor is it random chance. The most empowering position is to say, every breeze that brushes my face on a hot day was caused by me. Every disturbing thought that I have in my meditation was caused by me. I'm almost literally quoting Swami Vivekananda. In one place, he said, there was no blow that was not deserved, which is a profound statement, a kind of troubling statement if you forget that this is actually the most empowering view. The view that I am the author of all past actions, whose effects I am now enjoying. And just like that, I am too the author of all present actions, whose effects I have the power to determine in the future. So therefore, I can change what thoughts I think. Although that's very hard to do, since there's a kind of seemingly inexorable momentum set up by my previous modes of thinking. I can change the things I say. Although I'm strongly predisposed to say X, I have the freedom instead to say Y. And I can definitely change what I do. Where I might want to do action A, and that might be the natural action that comes, I might instead have the freedom to say, no, not this time. I will break the cycle. I will do B and not A. And to a large extent, this is what sadhana is. When you do japa, when you do puja, when you do kirtana, bhajana, when you meditate, above all when you meditate, you're trying to reclaim this freedom, which, exists in that very small gap between action and response. That's all this is. Something happens in the world, and then now it's up to me to decide how I will respond to it, how I will react to it. And there's going to be this kind of momentum that is going to try to get me to act in one way. And that's only going to perpetuate my karmic predicament. But through sadhana, I can increase that gap maybe, especially through meditation, when I sit down and quiet my mind, and when I take responsibility for the way one thought links to another, when I'm able to access that level of subtlety in the moment-to-moment unfolding of my life, then there comes this gap, an increasingly widened gap between what maybe Viktor Frankl would call stimulus and response, or action and reaction. And because of sadhana, spiritual practice, more and more I can reclaim my ability to think different thoughts than the ones I'm predisposed to think, to say different things than the things I'm predisposed to say, and to do, most of all, to do different things than the things that I'm strongly predisposed to do. And therefore, I can determine a different future. I can change the course of my trajectory, if you will. So free will is important, but free will with karma and with reincarnation. So this is kind of like, I guess, the standard doctrine that we've been discussing over the course of the past few weeks. And it's a wonderfully empowering doctrine, no? Because now you are the author. And by the way, this allows you to just kind of resign yourself to the fact that everything is perfect and just as it should be. Like you can say who to praise, actually, who to blame. Praiser praised and blamer blamed are one. You can remember Swami Vivekananda's poem, Song to the Sannyasin, and you can take heart. In one of the verses, he says, thine only is the hand that holds the rope that drags thee on. In other words, you alone are the author of all your bondage. You alone are to blame for all the tragedy that has happened to you. And you alone are to be thanked for all the good stuff that has come to you. Your guru, your spiritual path, your friends, your family, all the kindnesses that have been done unto you by strangers on the bus. All of that was deserved. So, some people have a problem with receiving. They feel like they don't deserve anything. Hare, if somebody gives you a huge sum of money, in some previous life, they must have eaten you or something, or cheated you. And now in this life, that karmic debt is impelling them to pay off their debts. That what you call a sanskaric attachment to one another, like that's manifesting itself in this interaction, in this exchange. So whatever you receive was deserved, actually. You set that into motion with some previous action, either in this or previous lives. You were the author of that cause whose effect is your reception of the gift. So therefore, you shouldn't feel undeserving. Everything that comes to you in your life, you yourself set into motion. But similarly, you shouldn't feel upset about the bad stuff that happens because those need to be paid off sooner or later. Might as well pay it off now. And because you alone are to thank for all the good stuff, quote unquote good stuff that has happened, and because you alone are to quote unquote blame, I use that word very lightly, for all the, and by the way, we can't really say blame because after all, we were only doing our best with what we knew at the time. So blame is not the right word here. But because you alone are the author of the causes whose effects now come in the form of like quote unquote suffering, again, that's a very relative word which we use lightly, you can also rejoice. Thine only is the hand that holds the rope that drags thee on. Cease lament. That's what Swamiji says. Cease lament. Um, just this wonderful feeling of like, it's okay, actually. It's okay. Cease lament. Let go thy hold, sannyasin bold. Right? Let go thy hold, sannyasin bold. Say Om Tat Sat Om. And what that means is, and Sai is right on the money here, when you say Om Tat Sat Om, you are affirming a far deeper identity than the one who did the karma. So to answer that question, who is you yourself? Like I've been saying, you yourself are the author of causes whose effects you are now either suffering or enjoying. Who is that you yourself? None other than the jiva, the individual soul, which, as you know, from the point of view of the highest Advaita, is but an appearance in the true self, the Paramatman, which is that Om Tat Sat Om. That Tat Sat reality is verily consciousness, and that does not reincarnate. In that consciousness, you are dreaming this dream. And in this dream, you feel yourself to be this individual soul. So obviously, I'm speaking now on the relative level. I'm speaking from the point of view of maybe duality or qualified non-duality. These forms of spirituality, these traditions in which we recognize the individual soul to be a discrete entity. That's not really God. Maybe it's dependent on God in some way, as per some traditions' interpretation. But in other words, it's dependent on God, but not entirely identical with God. And it's unique. So each soul is a unique uh, dare I say, experiment. Each soul is a unique experiment in the vast totality of God. Again, I'm slipping into some Advaita language here, but I mean to just speak in the most like naive and like direct way. Yeah, just a temporary contraction of awareness. Again, that's a very Advaitic way of saying it. And although Advaita, like I was saying earlier, is my favorite philosophy, it's my pet idea, if you will. It's the tradition that I belong to. But the tradition, more importantly, the tradition I belong to is the tradition of Sri Ramakrishna, meaning we are just as comfortable defending Dvaita, duality, as we are Advaita, non-duality. So now I'm obviously speaking from a more Dvaitic point of view, the idea that there is God, and I'm saying that God is the creator, maintainer, and destroyer of the world, and I am saying that God is all-powerful and all good. And in order to absolve God of the problem of evil, which any theist has to do, I'm saying that God is not responsible for one soul being created this way and another soul being created that way. And I'm saying God is not responsible for all the evil that occurs in the world, whether that be ecological or sociological or economical or political or individual. I'm saying that we are the author of our actions. And that's a wonderful thing, actually. And notice what kind of characterization we get of God in this view. Like here, we understand God to be actually so good that she won't even take away our right to act. Can you imagine a parent who just won't give us room to grow because she's so afraid of us falling and scraping our knees? That kind of parenting is not good parenting. It's a bit claustrophobic. Like that helicopter mom who is so concerned with you doing what she thinks you ought to do that she doesn't give you the freedom to like, quote unquote, fuck around and find out. In a way, a good mother trusts you, trusts that you can make your own decisions, and trusts that even if those decisions are wrong, wrong in the sense that they will bring personal suffering, even then it's okay, because that suffering is deeply meaningful. And for its own sake, even. I was going to say because it helps you learn and maybe in the future make better decisions, but I don't even want to say that. I just want to say, like, in and of itself, falling down and scraping your knees is part of life. And that's part of the joy of living and learning and being free. So, as someone is saying in the chat here, it's better to be free in the chaos of Kolkata like a dog, Sutima is saying, than to be a slave in comfort. So imagine if God could create a perfect world in which everyone is perfectly safe, in which there are no despots, in which there are no political instabilities, in which your eyes are not stinging from tear gas right now, in which there is no personal discomfort, no pain, no sickness, no grief. Such a world would be a cloying comfort, a claustrophobic assurance. I think this world of chaos in which we ourselves are the author of every effect that can be enjoyed and experienced, it's a much better world, arguably. And God is much better off with this, what do you call it? Characterization. So this is from the dualistic point of view. Like that's the rub. Yes. So this is the dualistic point of view or the qualified non-dualistic point of view that like, look, God exists and you exist and you are the individual soul which is discrete and unique and you are on your journey. And in this journey, you are absolutely free to do anything you want, to say anything you want, to think anything you want. But good, good, bad, bad, and none escapes the law. Whosoever wears the form must wear the chain. In other words, whoever is an embodied soul, whatever action they do must have its equal and opposite reaction. If this is true of physics, if it's true of energy, it must be also true spiritually, because these laws are sort of fractal in nature. They are vyapti, it's called, pervasive. You know, what's true here must also be true on the moon, etc. So similarly, if it's true in physics, you can see that there's some parallel here also in what we're saying, that like good, good, bad, bad. And these terms, good and bad, are of course mental. By good, I mean sukha inducing, and by bad, I mean dukkha inducing, pleasure and pain. But both from a spiritual point of view are bad, because both will keep you enmeshed in this wheel of birth and death, which, you know, gets old after a while. But just not even taking that point of view, the exalted spiritual view of moksha-oriented action, just like from a mundane, naive point of view, it's wonderful to think that I myself am responsible for all the effects. Too true. Whosoever wears the form must wear the chain. But far beyond both name and form is Atman ever free. Know thou art that sannyasin bold, and say Om Tat Sat Om. Because like Sai is pointing out, actually, you are not this play actor on the stage of karma, playing out your role as per your past roles and future roles. You know, like you're not actually the actor, you're that being who is not killed when the actor is killed on stage, birthless and deathless, who doesn't come into being with the beginning of the play, and who doesn't die with the end of the play. And yet, right now, I'm talking about the play. So, insofar as we're talking about the play, free will is important, because free will, not only is it important in the theodicy sense, in that it absolves God of the various evils in the world while maintaining God's all goodness and all powerfulness, omnipotence, I guess is the word I'm looking for. But it's also important on an individual level because it makes us feel like agents. And therefore we can choose to do this or choose to do that. So in one sense, we each and every one of us has a mission, right? We each and every one of us have like some goal or some quest in our life. And every now and then we come together in a community, in a sort of collective, in order to articulate that quest. So it's highly likely that an individual's quest is shared by other beings also. Like other beings might be able to resonate with what a particular individual wants. So like say maybe Che Guevara rides his motorbike up and down Argentina and he decides, okay, look, we need a change in government. And then he goes around and spreads his philosophy. And other people say, oh my God, I think the same way. I agree. Like I have the same idea. And then they join up with this leader called Che Guevara and then they form a guerrilla movement and they try to overthrow a government. So like that, it happens, right? Like there are individuals, remarkable individuals who have a vision. But you know, when they express that vision, we find that it was not idiosyncratic at all. Like they were just the one to give a voice to that which was already in the air, to that which was already being thought by many people in that vicinity. So, like Swami Atmarupanandaji made a good point the other day. He said, when I first read about Vedanta, when I first read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna in a bookstore in Switzerland, I believe, he said, I was shocked because I found that these were all my thoughts. These were all my words. Only I haven't ever thought them before or said them before. Haven't you felt that? When you hear something and you're like, this is new, but really it isn't. I myself believe this. More importantly, I myself think this. And I myself would say this. Only I haven't yet heard it said until this person came along and said it. So, like that, we find that our quest, our individual mission, is not that individual after all. That sometimes it's in dialogue with or participating in some broader collective mission, which changes obviously from age to age, from culture to culture. But there is, we say, a yuga, if you will, an age. And within that age, there is a certain mission of that age, which many souls, of course, kind of find themselves drawn to. And it exists in different fields. So I gave an example maybe from the political field. Maybe there's an example in the economical or sociological field, like the women's suffrage movement. That's like a quest, a mission that many people felt drawn to and many people participated in. And, Virginia Woolf and her book, A Room of One's Own. There she says, for a woman to succeed, she needs privacy. And very rarely do women get that opportunity to like be alone with her thoughts. Usually a woman is too busy taking care of her children or her spouse. She has all of these social duties. And when she's not taking care of the men folk, she has all these social obligations with other female members of her society. And so a woman rarely has time to sit alone and think. And Virginia Woolf's book opens with a woman trying to sit and think and then getting chased off the lawn of a college, a famous university, which she calls Oxbridge, just a kind of name for all the famous universities at that time. So women weren't really allowed into the intellectual world, and even if they weren't given the space to actually think. Solitude and privacy are both required in order to be able to do philosophy. So Virginia Woolf said, for a woman to succeed, the reason women aren't succeeding, she said, is because they don't get privacy. They must have a room of their own, she says. And not only that, they must have money. And even today, when you buy women's clothes, oftentimes it won't have a pocket or anything. Like women's clothes don't necessarily have pockets because why should a woman put money anywhere? Like, why should a woman own any money? Like, it's a new idea that a woman should have her own money. Usually, all the finances of the household would be managed by the menfolk. So women didn't really have access to the financial world. What to say of like working and whatnot. So Virginia Woolf, like in the 1800s, had this idea like these are the only two factors. If a woman has a room of her own, and if she has her own money, then she can do something with her life. And so she just wrote this book and put it out there. And many people who read the book, women and men alike, were enthralled by the idea. They were excited. They were like, these are my thoughts. And I want to be part of this movement, which guarantees that a woman, if she wants it, can have this privacy and can have economic, financial freedom. Why shouldn't she have pockets in her pants, if you will? Why shouldn't she wear the pants, so to speak? So that's Virginia Woolf, and like there are many other great feminists like that, like Mary Wollstonecraft and whatnot, like all of these people. Now, when you read their work, you find that they are outstanding individuals, but only in the sense that they are the everyman or every woman, only in the sense that they finally said what everyone was thinking, right? Now, that's true in the feminist sphere, but there's also various other fronts upon which this collective action is occurring. So then the LGBTQIA community is very important and very controversial. There are many people who are lesbian or gay or bisexual or trans or various others that you can find along the spectrum who don't like the LGBTQIA because they don't like certain things like born this way. They would prefer the narrative that I chose to be this way. Whereas the LGBTQIA feels that the narrative born this way, which of course Lady Gaga champions, that narrative is important to protect people in Bible Belt states from appearing as like cultural traitors. What? You mean you chose to be gay? How could you choose against our church and choose against our family? No, the obvious response to that is, I didn't choose, Dad, Mom, I didn't choose. I was born this way. This is the way that I am. And you have to learn to accept me because I have to accept me as I am. So the LGBTQIA community feels that that's a better, LGBTQIA plus community, feels that's a better way to approach the issue. So it's complicated because while the collective has a certain idea as to how to fight its fight, not everyone is going to resonate with that. And so there are splinter groups, obviously, within the very diverse discourse of sexual freedom and gender freedom and whatnot. So that's another front. And so like trans rights, and not just trans rights, but like what it means to be both black and trans. That's something else. That's a whole like the conversations around intersectionality, like those things are collective movements and they vibrate, as it were, in the ether, if I can use that phrase. Like these thoughts are there. And then it's up to a certain individual or a group of individuals to bring them from their thought form into word form and from their word form into some kind of action that usually happens on a collective level. So very rarely do you have individuals who are idiosyncratically putting forward a position. You have groups. So I think it's true that each individual has their own unique mission, but it's not that unique actually, right? Because in a sense, it's in dialogue with or participating in some bigger cultural movement which they find themselves in. Sometimes unconsciously, inadvertently, they find that they're drawn to some movement, if you will. Okay, so having said all of that, free will is very nice because we're each and every one of us like totally free to do whatever we want, to think whatever we want, to say whatever we want, and to do whatever we want. And therefore, we're free to collectivize and together as a collective, um, make some kind of um, change in the world, if you will, or at least change in our own lives. And so we're also free to like royally fuck that up. You know, like where we depose the government, but then we usher in a power vacuum, which is much worse, a period of civil war in which life is much, much, much worse than during the time of that despotic government. And maybe we realize, oh, there were other channels by which this revolution could have been fought. Or we realize, no, this was worth it because this is what freedom looks like, etc., etc. We're all free to collectivize and do whatever we want, and we're also free to bear the consequences of that, the repercussions of that, and then maybe to like choose differently in the future, maybe. Okay, so having said all of that, it's important to remember that like one's mission, one's quest, one's personal self-expression is deeply individualistic. As we learn in the Bhagavad Gita, we each have a swadharma. We each have our own calling. But even though it's individualistic, it's not necessarily idiosyncratic because often that swadharma is going to be in dialogue with or participating in some wider, more collective expression. Okay, so I think the first thing to say is that the mission, the individual's mission, is a shared thing. And insofar as it's shared, it's an expression of free will. It's an expression of, if you want to use a non-dual turn of phrase, the infinite exploration of Lord Shiva's infinite being. So God herself wants to explore her own infinitude, and so each person is an experiment, is a unique vantage point from which she can perceive herself and enjoy herself and experience herself. And so the collectives are naturally that same impulse working itself out on a slightly wider scale. So nations can move in this way. The entire universe could be moving in this way. And of course, small communities in villages could be moving in this way. Families could be moving in this way. Individuals can be moved in this way. There is some kind of expression, is what I want to say. And using our free will, we can decide, insofar as we're choosing the free will model, to opt into that or not. And different people are, of course, drawn to different, let's say, experiments within the infinitude of God. How about that? Is that a nice thing to say? Like nice way to phrase it. So this is all assuming free will, okay? Like everyone is free, and assuming free will, we each and every one of us are free to participate in whatever experiment we want, in whatever mission, in whatever experiment. And each and every one of these experiments are valid because they're each a way for God to explore itself. So if you want to like be part of, I don't know, something like really horrific, and you want to go out and kill a bunch of people with a pack of serial killers, that's also valid actually. That's also your own personal quest, which is expressing itself collectively. And by the way, isn't that just what a government is? But anyway, like, so it's like something that you want to do, and you get together with some other robber barons, and then you like call yourself a government and do that. Right? That's perfectly fine. That's also valid. That's another way in which we as a collective are learning. We as a singular unit, as consciousness, is exploring its own infinite being. So all of these missions are fine. So what's this lecture really about? Um, it's about my mission, I guess, because Myra Devi some time ago had asked a beautiful question. You know, she pointed out that we had been giving lectures on our past, on our lineage, where we've come from collectively. And we're talking a little bit also about our ideals and our values as a community, as per last week's lecture. But now we ought to ask, well, where do we see this going? If anywhere. Like, are we going somewhere? Do we have a mission? Do we have a plan? So Myra Devi was very sweet to ask me for a mission statement of sorts, like a plan. And of course, my response was, I don't have one. There is no mission whatsoever. So in a sense, that's true. And that's what I want to argue for today, why we shouldn't have a mission. Because I'm actually now going to switch over to the deterministic position. But if we take a free will model, right, which is what I've been riffing on for the past maybe hour or so, and don't be afraid. I'm gonna hop over to the determinist camp because you know I'm a determinist. What can I say? Actually, I'm not. The position is quite nuanced. Like Sri Ramakrishna accepts both free will and determinism on different levels, and yet it's not quite compatibilism. It's something very interesting, actually, without bringing in voluntarism or involuntarism or any of those like Western secular nuances when it comes to the conversation about free will. Like Sri Ramakrishna's theological position on whether or not there's free will is incredibly nuanced. And that's what I've been trying to develop with you over the past several weeks. Like we've been exploring that position, which is wholly accepting of free will. That's why I'm happy to speak from the point of view of free will. And that's what we've been doing for the past hour or so. But like anyway, don't worry. I'm going to switch to determinism in just a few moments. But right now, insofar as you're convinced, or insofar as you like this idea of free will, agency, karma, reincarnation, insofar as you're willing to see all of this as this beautiful cosmic experiment in which God is exploring the infinitude of our own being through each person, which naturally is going to be expressed on an individual and collective level, insofar as you're okay with that, then you can say, well, no, we do have a mission. You know, we do have a mission. Like each and every one of us can't help it. Swami Vivekananda, Sri Ramakrishna told him when he was very young, you will go and teach. And Swami Vivekananda, Naren, said, I will do no such thing. And Sri Ramakrishna says, you have no choice. Your very bones will make you do it. And that's exactly what Sri Krishna says to Arjuna on the field of battle in the Bhagavad Gita. Sri Krishna says to Sri Arjuna, like, you can't help it. Your very nature will make you do this because you are a Kshatriya. And as a Kayastha, now you have to fight this fight. And it's your fight. And you can't avoid it because if you want to go and sit in a Himalayan cave, you won't be able to. Something will force you out of that cave and force you back into the theater of action because it is your very nature to do so. Just like it's the nature of a sunflower to be a sunflower and not an oak tree. And just like it's the nature of the sun to be the sun and shine, so too is it your nature to do whatever it is it's your nature to do. You see, and sometimes you don't even know what that is. Sometimes you have an idea about what that is, but then you realize that what's coming through you, what wants to express itself through you, is very different from your preconceived notions of what you thought that was going to be. So in any case, we each and every one of us has a mission. We each and every one of us have a mission. Recently, I've been really struggling with has and have, was and were, I realize. I don't know why. I find that the singular and plural are getting muddled in my brain. And I suspect it has to do with more than just bad grammar. I suspect it has to do with something theological, insofar as I'm losing my grip on Advaita. If that makes sense. If I can admit that to you, I've been so at home in Advaita for a long time. But now it's becoming increasingly clear to me that it's madness to say that God is only Advaita. Who can say God is only this and not that? God is one. No doubt God is one. But who can say God is only one? In fact, God is both one and two. In fact, who can say God is only two? God is one and two and many. So in this kind of broadening out, Advaita and Dvaita and Vishish Advaita are all sounding equally tenable to me, equally spiritually viable, equally wonderful. And I think that's just what it means to practice in the lineage of Sri Ramakrishna. You might have your own favorite, your own predisposition, but I think over time, by the grace of Thakur, you get widened out a little bit. So maybe that's where it's coming from. This is me trying to excuse my poor grammar in this lecture. I don't know if it's one or two. It's probably both and neither. In any case, um, yeah. So in any case, yeah, exactly. So Param Advaya might be the inclusivity of Dvaita. Hmm? Anyway, having said all of this, if we accept free will, then we can also accept karma and reincarnation, but we can also accept swadharma. Swadharma is important. So because of karma, because of reincarnation, we come into this world equipped with a certain kind of predisposition, and that's unique to us. So this is called our swadharma. But like I've been saying earlier, that swadharma, although is individual, although is unique, is by no means insular or idiosyncratic. It's the kind of thing that finds expression actually on a collective level. So it might be my swadharma to do X, and it might be your swadharma to do Y, but X and Y are both inalienable parts of some greater whole called Z or something like that. Z is the collective action, and each and every one of us is participating in it by virtue of our X or our Y or our A or our B or something like that, by virtue of our unique predisposition, our swadharma, if you will. So, taking that notion, swadharma, which is determined in some sense by karma and reincarnation, putting all of this together in the free will model, we get this idea that we each and every one of us has a mission. Each and every one of us has a mission. Each and every one of us have a mission. We each have a mission. Each and every one of us has a mission, and we each have a mission in order to enact, if you will, the play of God. It's all a līlā, it's all a play. And the way that God perpetuates that play is by karma and reincarnation and swadharma and individually embodied souls. So I'm very interested in the play. Some people aren't. Some people just want to like be absorbed in the Advaitic oneness of Brahman. They're not interested in the play. They go so far as to call it void. That's fine too. They go so far as to call it illusion, and they will have nothing to do with it, calling it worldliness or something like that. That's fine. That's perfectly fine. It's just that I like to play. I like theater. I like music. I like art. And I don't think that I have to sacrifice any of these things in order to practice spirituality. And so I like the play, and so that's why I like to talk about līlā. And so I can entertain ideas of karma, reincarnation, individually embodied souls, each of them with their own swadharma, their own mission, if you will. So insofar as somebody asks, what is your mission? It's important to remember that each and every one of us has a unique expression called swadharma, and it often cannot even be articulated. And do you know why? Because the thing that you are here to do actually has never been done before. Because one thing we notice about this universe is that there's no redundancy here. Like that's one of the laws of the Sanskrit poetry system, actually. Like redundancy, you can't be redundant. It's one of the laws of aesthetics and poetics in Sanskrit, in Kavya. Similarly, in nature, you find that everything has its place. There's nothing redundant, really. Not that God can't be redundant. Obviously, God is free to be redundant if she so pleases. Who's limiting God to like non-redundancy? But I think the point I'm trying to make here is that why would you, Yashodhara or Jess, be here if um, if you weren't unique? The very fact that you're here implies that there's something unique about you that has never before been explored and never again will be explored. This is a unique experiment in God. And so, having said that, it's very hard to actually answer the question, what is your mission? Because it's often inarticulatable. It's just something that comes through you in the moment as an expression of your own joyous innate fullness, if you will. As just Seth is saying, it's like it's your nature to express. And so you can like suppress it, like your parents can tell you, oh, you should be a lawyer or a doctor or an engineer, and then you can try to suppress that swadharma, but even then it will still come out some way. It'll still find some way to express itself. If your dharma is to teach, and then somebody forces you to become a doctor, you'll probably end up being the kind of doctor who teaches others because it's your swadharma. And you could say, because you're a brahmana, like it's your nature as a brahmana to like want to teach and want to live for knowledge. And so you'll do that, you know. If you are maybe a kayasta, a kshatriya, then maybe it's in your dharma, you can't resist it to like lead and to like act and to be involved in administration or government, to fight. Maybe like the fighting spirit is deeply embedded in your being because you're a kshatriya. Now, obviously, you can't really conceive of swadharma without, to some extent, varna. But that's a conversation for another day. Because, Swami Vivekananda and Sri Ramakrishna defended varna. It's a very important aspect, not only of the Bhagavad Gita, but of the universe. Because everything, for it to have its own swadharma, naturally means that things have certain specificity, if you will. And so too with humans. And so what we're rejecting is varna as it's understood in the modern era, that it's somehow something that you get through birth, as if it has something to do with the body. No, no such thing. And the idea that somehow brahmanas are better than shudras, again, no such thing. Each is great in her own place, and you cannot deny that each is unique and has a unique role to play. And even if you try to suppress your swadharma, the fact is that you won't be successful. It's going to come out. It's going to express itself. So the first thing I want to say, using a free will model, okay, just assuming free will, is this. We're each free to act, but we're each we're better off if we act according to our swadharma. And that obviously is individual, but will express itself on the collective as well. And so if anybody asks you for what your mission is, know that you have one. You must. Your very bones will make you do it. To cite Sri Ramakrishna there. You have a mission, and that mission will involve other people, naturally. Not necessarily, but most likely. That mission, whether you understand what it is or not, whether you can articulate it or not, it will be something that will find its expression on a collective level. Even though you are enacting it on the individual level, using your freedom, motivated by your own proclivity, your own predisposition, which is determined by an inscrutable cause of chain and effects called karma and reincarnation. Okay. Now, now it's going to get fun and very interesting. We're going to switch into a determinism model. But before I do that, do you mind if I just like turn on some lights? The sun has finally set, and I'm very happy about that. But let me just light some lamps, and I'll be right back. 1 second. Okay. Thank you for your patience. Let's switch back now into a deterministic model. So from the deterministic point of view, No, individual souls are not distinct from God. In the dualistic point of view, the individual soul and the world are both unique categories. They're different from God. Maybe you can say they're parts of God, but God is anya, something other than them. Now, insofar as God is not the individual souls, then yes, the individual souls, each and every one of them can act freely. But what if God was also the material cause and not just the efficient cause? Like, what if God was the world? And what if God was each individual soul? In fact, from a non-dual point of view, that's the only logical conclusion you can arrive at if you accept God is absolute. Because if God is absolute, then anything that is not God is a limit to God. After all, like we said in that lecture a few weeks ago, the definition of limit is where one thing ends and where another thing begins. This is called paricheda, limitation. And limitation means duality, because where one thing ends and another thing begins implies that there is some second, some other, at least one other by which God can be limited. So if there's a world and God is not the world, then God is limited because God is everything but the world. If there are individual souls and God is not the individual soul, then again the individual soul, like the world, acts as a paricheda, as a limit to God. For God to be aparichedana, for God to be unlimited, for God to truly be absolute, there cannot be anything other than God. There cannot be any second reality apart from God. So souls don't exist apart from God in actuality. Nor does the world exist apart from God in actuality. So now the view is God, who is the absolute reality, we can call her pure consciousness, through her own will and as an expression of her own freedom, becomes the world and embodies herself as each and every individual soul in order to experience the fullness of that world. So now there aren't three parallel lines, God, world, and soul. There is only a circle. Like everything is all brought together into one wholeness. Akanda mandalakaram vyaptyam yena characharam. God is that unbroken circle of consciousness, which is all pervasively present in the moving and unmoving, in the sentient and insentient. So what you get now is this beautiful model of Advaita. And this is, of course, the model that I tend to prefer, or at least have preferred for much of my life. And so in this model, you can't really talk about free will. Because in this model, there is no individual that can will apart from God, since there is no individual that exists apart from God. Every individual is God through and through. It's not that God lives in you. God is you. The very mentality, the very physicality that makes up the individual embodied existence is God through and through. This world is not God's. This world is God. That's a very important idea. And Swami Vivekananda told us, don't seek God, see God. Never approach anything except as God. Sri Ramakrishna told us that the inferior devotee thinks of God as transcendent only, whereas the slightly better devotee thinks that God is the indweller in all beings. But the best devotee feels that God has become everyone and everything. And this was Sri Ramakrishna's Uttamavada, you could say, his highest doctrine. The idea that God became the world and became each individual soul and is now abiding immanently as everything, sentient or insentient. Not only in everyone, but as everyone. So this non-dual view destroys any idea you can have about free will. Because free will presupposes the individuality of the soul, the separateness of the soul, the distinctness of the soul. If not totally distinct, as in the dualistic system, at least partially, at least like a part of God. There must be some distinction for the soul to have its uniqueness apart from God. That being said, in the Dvaita or Vishisht Advaita view, I think free will is no problem. You can have free will in those views. But in the Advaita view, no, you can't really have free will because here God is absolute. And by the way, the kind of Advaita I'm talking about might not be the Advaita that you're used to. It's not necessarily classical Advaita, right? It's not classical Advaita. It's tantric non-duality, or you could say it's a devotional Advaita, a theistic Advaita. So here, the claim of Advaita is based on God, God's absoluteness. And insofar as you accept that God is absolute, you have to accept that she's unlimited and totally free. And if you accept that, then you have to accept that she's non-dual. And if you accept that she's non-dual, then where's room for you to act outside of God? So everything that you do, God is doing through you. Do you see how the two models are not that different? Because if you say through karma and reincarnation, you incarnated in this body as this kind of person with a particular swadharma, and you are being compelled to do what you want to do because of that swadharma, in one sense, that's articulated in a free will model also, like I just did a few moments ago. Now, in this deterministic model, that itcha, that desire, which is trying to express itself through you, that's God's desire, actually. So when we meditate on God in the puja, in the very beginning, we meditate upon her as Kamini, she who is desire embodied. We say, Kham singaskandham samarudham raktavarnam chaturbhujam Nanalankara bhushadyam raktavarnam nanalankara bhushadyam shanka chakra dhanurvana virajita karambujam. So we're visualizing God now as a woman with red skin, red symbolizing desire, which moves us into action, into rajas. She's not only red, she's dressed in red. And of course she has four arms and she's holding various weapons. Yeah, it's for Jagadhatri, but we use it also in the puja as Kamini Dhyanam. We meditate on the goddess who is Icha Rupini. She is of the form desire. Often we make this joke. Shiva without Icha, in other words, Shiva without the goddess, becomes Shava, corpse. So for Shiva to be meaningful, for this universe to be meaningful, there must be some motive action within it, some dynamic aspect, which we call Shakti. But that Shakti is desire, actually. Desire, which happens on various levels, the desire to eat, to procreate, which even the small single-celled organism experiences. That's also Shakti. And that propels creation, if you will. It propels the līlā. So the līlā is operated by desire, by the engine of desire, because karma and reincarnation wouldn't work if there wasn't kama. Because of kama, desire, there is then karma, action. And because of action, there is necessarily going to be some punarjanma. Punarapi maranam, And of course, again and again, death. And again, rebirth. So this punarjanma idea, this idea of rebirth, is really about reaping what we sowed. But sowing, acting, is really about expressing desire. So it's desire that propels us forward. Desire for sex, for chocolate cake, is really not that different in type than desire for God. Maybe different in degree, but that same desire, which expresses itself a desire for sex, that same desire expresses itself as a desire for God. Yeah, so in Bhaja Govinda, Shankara is saying, Punarapi jananam, punarapi maranam. Like again and again I'm born, again and again I die. But why? Why is there this punarapi janma? Why is this continuous rebirth going on? Because of action. Action and reaction. But why is there action and reaction? Well, because of desire. So in one sense, there is no free will because mother embodies herself as every being, and then she also acts as desire through that being in order for her play to perpetuate. So all of this is part of her līlā. And her līlā is run on the fuel of desire, if you will, using the mechanism of karma, reincarnation, swadharma, etc., all the things that we previously talked about. So in the deterministic model, or rather in the non-dual model, God alone has become everything and she alone is playing all the parts. So then, is there really any individual's mission? No. Although in one sense it feels that way. It feels like each individual has their own individual mission, which they're expressing on a collective scale. Actually, it's all just God's will. God is doing everything. And it's her mission. Is it really even a mission? Because again, when you call it a mission, you're implying that she has something to get out of it, right? Like, I want to change the world because I want things to be better for certain individuals. Well, that's a desire. I have a desire for a particular outcome. You think God has a desire? However noble the desire is, the desire itself implies a lack. God doesn't have desire. God is desire. But it's not the kind of desire that desires an outcome, for that would make God incomplete. It's only when we're incomplete that we desire something to be different than what is already the case. So God can't have desire for outcome. And nor can God be acting out of a fear of consequence. Since God is complete and whole, what fear can there be for God? There's no change that can occur in God. And as a result, what could God possibly fear? So it's not desire, it's not fear. God's work, God's mission, then cannot really be called a mission. It cannot really be called work. Because work is something that you do for a particular outcome, either to get something or to avoid something. So God doesn't have a mission. God doesn't have work. What do you call something that you do for its own sake? Play. So notice, all of this is God's play. Insofar as God is desire, it's desire for its own sake. It's desire just to express itself. So this might come as a disappointment sometimes because we all want, we have this self-aggrandizing idea that we're all here to do something great and change the world. That's not untrue. Obviously, that can happen through you if God so desires it. But it ain't no thing. It's like NBD that you do this. It's just God playing, you know? So we want to take ourselves seriously. We want to say, oh my God, I'm a Pleiadian and I'm a star seed and I was born from this particular Atlantean civilization and I'm here as a great healer of humanity and I'm here to teach all these NPCs about the truth. And we get this kind of messianic complex because we think that we're on this like grand mission to change the world, to heal the world. No such thing in this theory, in this philosophy. We're saying the world does not need to be healed, does not need to be changed, but that doesn't mean no action. Instead, the actions that come through you naturally in each and every moment is nothing more than an expression of God's play. That God is just playing through all of us, as it were. And that, on an absolute level, is true. That there's nothing to be accomplished, there's no mission, there's no work, there's no desired outcome, there's no feared consequence. It's all just happening for fun. That's absolutely true. But as an individual, relatively speaking, you feel it as a kind of calling, as a kind of mission, and that should be cherished too. So even if you want to use that language, I'm a starseed Palladian from the Atlantean civilization, I'm here to change the world, that's perfectly fine. In fact, that's a very valid way to experience God's play as it acts through you. So like that's why we can't condemn anything because every single thing, however diabolical, is still part of God's play. But that doesn't mean you're not part of the play. If you're part of the play, then your play might be to oppose that thing. But again, ultimately it's no big deal. Absolutely, it's just God playing. And this is what Swami Vivekananda realized in Kshir Bhavani. So now I want to close this lecture with something I hope will be very poignant for us. Because I want to answer this question now more directly. What's my mission? Why are we here together? What are we doing? Some of us have been here since 2020. We started giving lectures around that time. And I'm seeing St. Anthony is here and Rory Ji is here and Digambari and even Brock G, right? Like Brock G has been with us for a very long time, and Zachary Wilson G, and there's Survachala Dasi, and like so many of you have been here from the very beginning, like since 2020 maybe. Some of you maybe 2021, 2022, it doesn't matter, but we've been doing this a long time together. And if Master wills it, a long time more, until my last breath. I'm praying sincerely that I will die mid-lecture, or that I can die in the harness, working to do the quote-unquote mission, as I'm going to articulate it in a few moments. I don't want to retire. Please bless me, Ma, that I won't retire. I want to work till my final breath. That being said, what's all this work for? What's the mission? I want to ask this question. We've been together now for like 5 years, and we're probably some of us going to be together for some time more, insofar as Ma wills it. And more importantly, we all seem to be resonating with the ideas that we hear in this space. Most of you here in this room of about 60 of you aren't new. Like I'm looking down the screen of all the faces that I can see, and most of you I've been looking at, because I tend to like to look at the faces on the screen. Like I've been looking at your same faces every single week, sometimes 4 or 5 times a week for hours on end, for like years and years and years and years and years. You're not like new. Like some of you are newer, but not really. Like most of you have been here for a very long time, and clearly it's because we're resonating with something here that is being expressed in the collective. Like I'm saying these words, but they're not my words. Jamie, yes, Jamie is there. Jamie's been here since the beginning also, right? Like, yeah, Jamie, you've been here all along. And as Jamie is saying in the chat, like she's heard it all before, and yet each time it seems new. That must be because we as a collective are all resonating with something. And none of these things that I'm saying are my thoughts. God forbid. Everything that I'm saying, you'll find in Swami Vivekananda, complete work of Swami Vivekananda. And if you find anything that I'm saying that's not there and Swamiji rejected it once, I only want to represent what our teachers have told us. So I'm only here to represent my lineage and the ideas of this particular lineage. Not any unique or individual idea. And it just so happens that those ideas, the ideas of Sri Ramakrishna, Sarada Devi, and Swami Vivekananda, the ideas of Kali worship and this form of Tantra, like these ideas clearly must be resonating. Otherwise, why would we, week after week after week, want to hear them, want to think about them? Because they're our own thoughts, actually. They're our own words. And it's so wonderful to hear our own thoughts and our own words expressed and said back to us every week in a new way for us to delight, as if looking into a mirror and marveling at your own beauty. That seems to be what's going on, right? So, this question, what's your mission, is a very important question because it's not only about what is this boy's mission or this boy's interest, like what's the plan here? What's the plan, Dan? Like, it's not really that. It's like, what are you guys all doing? Why is it that you all get together on Zoom week after week after week and talk about this stuff? Like, I'm gonna say for its own sake. And that's ultimately going to be the thesis that we have no mission and we ought to not have one. And we should do this for no desired outcome or no feared consequence. We should do this as play for fun. That's all. That's going to be the thesis. But essentially, and sorry to spoil it in the beginning, but the question that is like okay, now what? Like what's coming up? And I think this is a very good time to ask this question because we just talked about the past, our lineage, our tradition, where Kali came from, how it is that Kali went from a pre-Vedic, non-Vedic civilization into Vedic civilization, how it is she went from esoteric tantric circles, into the homes and hearts of people all around the world. Like, how did Kali make it here to California? We had that conversation in the lecture called A Brief History of Kali, her story. I hope you enjoyed that little bit. I didn't think I got enough credit for that one. But like there's that conversation. Then the week after that, I wanted to have a conversation about our ideals and our values as a community. Because we can learn a lot from other spiritual communities. I'm not going to call them failed experiments because there's no such thing as a failed experiment. It's all an exploration of Ma's infinite being. But we can look at some other communities and say, yeah, maybe we shouldn't be an orgiastic sex cult. Or maybe we shouldn't turn into a business venture in which everyone is a business prospect. Maybe we should take what Sri Ramakrishna said seriously about lust and greed. Maybe there are some values that we can articulate based on the life and teaching of our teachers. Swami Vivekananda, Sri Ramakrishna, and of course in our particular lineage, Swami Sarvadevanandaji, Swami Shankaranandaji, Swami Brahmanandaji, and Sri Ramakrishna. In that particular parampara, there's a way to be that our teachers have modeled for us. It's their life really that was the teaching, and that life inspires us to aspire to certain ideals and values. So I want to talk about that. We did. And by the way, you guys, last week, remember the internet gave out? Thank you so much, Yashodhara, for like chanting us out. I was feeling kind of incomplete. I'm like, oh my God, I haven't done the Arpanam. I haven't, like, it's like you're in the middle of a Homa and then the rain comes and puts out your fire. That's actually never happened to me. Once I was doing a Homa and by God's grace, the storm came just suddenly like that. It started raining and the fire didn't go out by God's grace. And then also another time I was doing a Homa and there was a certain number of mantras that I had to offer. It's like 10% of the Purasharna, like that. And the fire went out actually. I ran out of wood. I ran out of fuel because it was so many mantras. It was going on for hours, and I just ran out of fuel, and I didn't get to the end of my recitation. It was like, oh my God, like the Sankalpa was I would do these many, and I was like, oh my God. So then, Ma's will, what can I do? And suddenly, just as I had that thought, a wind blew through that forest clearing, and it blew on the embers, and the flame leaped back and leapt. It jumped out of the Homa Kunda almost, and it came back to life. And weirdly enough, the fuel that was available was enough for me to finish that particular Homa. So thus far in my career, I have been fortunate, touch wood, that I've never started a puja I couldn't finish, never started a Homa I couldn't finish. Even our more ambitious pujas and homas, like we did it. We fulfilled the vrata, like 9 days, Navaratri vrata. We like did it. So I was getting this feeling of like, oh my God, I had a sankalpa. I sat down on my asan to perform this homa, and it got cut short by Ma's will, of course. But thank you, Yashodhara, you saved us. Yashodhara chanted us out, and there was a beautiful discussion. I think Jess was moderating. Jamie was making some beautiful claims, and hopefully you can see all the stuff that you were saying. Like I heard Jamie a little bit, but all the stuff that Jamie Ma was saying, like that's exactly what came next in the reading. So I was so delighted to find that you had intuited the next part of the reading so effortlessly and seamlessly. Like clearly you were flowing along with the talk. Swamiji's words. Now, importantly, that was a conversation about where we are now. So we've already had two conversations about the past and about the future, present. Okay, so this conversation is a conversation about the future, just to kind of complete the triad. Oh, and by the way, so of course the internet gave out, right? So like we couldn't really finish the reading and I couldn't really get to the point. I couldn't summarize everything and present a clean, direct, clear TLDR answer to like what are our values, what are our ideals. So we did another session on Friday where I did the last bit of that reading and I'm going to upload it soon. So I finally found a way to use Final Cut Pro like an amateur to bring these two pieces together. That's all I know how to do for now. So this piece and this piece, I brought them together. So now we have a complete lecture. And I think I'm going to put it out under the title Advice to Spiritual Teachers and Aspirants. But really, you all know that it's a conversation about our ideals as a community. That's essentially what that lecture is. But I'm probably going to put it out as like just my open letter to the new age, if you will, or my open letter to spiritual communities. Because again, this is not advice that I'm giving. What do I know? I'm a 29-year-old person who just like started doing this like just shortly, like a few years ago. What do I know? I'm not saying this is my advice. God forbid, I have no advice for anybody. No, I'm saying this is the advice from our gurus, from our teachers, from our parampara. It's the advice from Swami Vivekananda, and it's the kind of thing that we saw embodied in Sri Ramakrishna's life. That's what I would like to present, and I think it's a kind of panacea. It's a cure-all for a lot of the problems that we find in the spiritual world. The kind of commercialism and the lack of professionalism, where teachers are hitting on students and whatnot. So either the teacher treats the students like a business prospect or a romantic prospect, or the students treat each other as business prospects or romantic prospects. Like there's a lot of sex and money in everything, but spirituality, and again, there's nothing wrong with sex and money. I hope you have the wildest, most satisfying sex of your life every day, all the time. This is my prayer for all of you. Sex is wonderful. But it should be dharmic in that it should be consensual between two consenting adults. And that can be a very tricky thing when it comes to sanghas and spiritual teachers. Like, I'm not sure that consent can be properly articulated between spiritual teachers and students. There's a clear asymmetry there. And that's what I wanted to point out in last week's lecture. And also, when it comes to money, as Quincy Jones beautifully said, when we talk about money, God walks out the room or something. God leaves the room or something. And so, like, the idea is that spirituality shouldn't be about money either. Obviously, donations are needed, but you can't ask for them. You can't make money a financial, like, you can't make it a barrier to learning. This is our ideal. Like, as Brahmanas, like, the ancient ideal of India has been to present spiritual knowledge for free and to live simple and austere lives based on donations because you're living for God, not for the world. Like these ideas are all very important. Christ spoke about them in the Sermon on the Mount. You can't avoid it. You can't get away from it when you come to spiritual life. It's about this, if you will, fourth chakra, to use that language. And naturally, that means transcending the activity in the lower chakras. Sex, money, power, if you will. So when there's sex, when there's money, when there's power, that spiritual community can be a little bit dangerous. I'm not saying it won't be valuable for you. It could be wonderful. But just as our community, as far as our community goes, we're setting some like aspirations and ideals, like saying that this is the way Sri Ramakrishna taught us, and we're gonna hold fast to the values that our gurus have imparted to us, that our tradition has imparted to us, and that's a conversation about the present, where we are now. And the present is eternal. These ideals are eternally good for all times, for past, present, and future. I know you guys. This shirt is coming apart. Where talk about the simple life, right? Okay. But yeah, this shirt is from back home. It's wonderful. It's so thin, but it's also a very, very affordable shirt, which means, sometimes it comes apart. Literally comes apart at the seams. Like me, like my mind, coming apart at the seams, The center cannot hold. Things fall apart, right? The Yeats poem. Mm. Okay, okay. Let me stay on the ball here. All of this to say that we've had a conversation about the past. You can watch that video. A brief history. What is it? A brief history. Where did Kali come from? That's what it was called. So you can watch that. That's the past. And you can also watch our talks on our lineage and our tantric lineage. Those are also about where we've come, where we've been, where we came from, which is very important. It's a very grounding conversation to have. So this stuff isn't just made up. It's something that people for millennia have been giving their lives for and passing the torch down, like that's a wonderful discussion. Then last week, oh, and because I brought these two videos together, it turned out to be something like 3 hours and 40 minutes. Oh my God. So it's gonna be a big one. Remember once we put out a video that was like, I think 6 hours long? It was called The Spiritual Heritage of India. Unsurprisingly, it was at least 6 hours, but we didn't even skim the surface because it's such a tradition, it's a vast tradition, at least 9,000 years old. Thank you, Ruthma. Yeah, that's a good one. I liked it because, there was it was during like the middle of COVID time, and it was very beautiful, a very early lecture that we gave. And Christina is asking, what was the name of the Monday's lecture? Not the last one, but the one before that. I think it was called How to Really Worship Kali, Free Will versus Determinism, or something like that. I think that's what it was called. And St. Anthony is saying, yeah, the 6 hour lecture was the first one I ever watched. It hooked me for the next 5 years. That's so beautiful, St. Anthony, because I think back then we were not yet banned on TikTok. So we would have the TikTok live open. And so that was Jess might remember those times, right? Like some of you might remember when there was like a TikTok live stream while we were having these Zooms. And that was wild. Like the Christian missionaries and the early Hindutva types, they would all be in there. Like, wow. Anyway, so that was an important, I think, important time and an important talk. So I think our video advice for spiritual teachers and spiritual aspirants is probably like that important also, I think, in my opinion, because it kind of sets a goal, an aspiration that we're all helping each other live up to based on the teachings that we were given by our masters. So, like, okay, that's about the present. But now we can ask this question, what about the future? Where are we going next? So this conversation that we're having today is like the third in the Trinity, the third in the triad, and the one to close the loop. Where are we going? And hopefully we've already given everything that we need to say about it. Having talked about free will and having talked about swadharma and the often inarticulatable nature of one's own unique expression, having talked about how a unique expression is often collective and often responding to some deeper like resonance in the yuga, like that should give you an answer already. Or we can take the deterministic point of view, and if we ask then the question, what's my mission? You'll realize, well, no, it's just mother playing, and everything will happen exactly as she wants, when she wants, and we don't have to think about it. We just have to moment by moment respond to that instinct, which we can't help but do. We can't help but be the kind of person that we are, which will naturally enact her Leela at our own pace. That's why some people were like, oh my God, there are videos on YouTube about Kali, but they're all being taken down. That's also her Leela. We don't have any dualistic idea where there's like some force opposing Kali. Maybe there is, but that force is also Kali. And that's also part of her Leela, and you don't have to think about it. You just do whatever you need to do in that moment because you can't help but do anything except that, and that will just be the will of God, and you leave it at that. So you probably already have your answer here about what our mission is. But I'm just gonna say something about Swami Vivekananda now to kind of express clearly what I mean by our mission. We do have one, but then again, we don't. And I'm going to say that it's probably better that we don't. In fact, I'm going to make one more case now along the lines of last week's lecture for why this mission stuff, this like goal oriented stuff, is another form of egotism or a very dangerous kind of complex that leads to maybe a messianic sort of thing. Like we have to be careful. Like I'm very careful about things like a mission. Okay. And I'm gonna argue for why in just a few moments. But let me say this first. Swami Vivekananda obviously had a mission. In fact, in January of 1900, he gave a talk here in California, actually in Pasadena at the Shakespeare Club. And I think it was the 25th or 27th of January or something. And he was asked by the Shakespeare Club to speak on his life and mission. He was very reticent about his own life. And like I said last week, he was very reticent about his master. Yet everything that came through him was um, a function of his spending time with his master. Like everything that he learned from Sri Ramakrishna, not just through what Sri Ramakrishna said, but through watching Sri Ramakrishna's life, that alone he expressed in America. But he didn't want to present the man. Like I said last week, Swami Vivekananda didn't want to start a sect or a religion. Jai Ma, Durga, Durga. He didn't want to start a sect. He didn't want to start a religion. He didn't want to like say it's my avatar versus your avatar. It's like Ramakrishna versus Jesus versus Krishna versus Rama. No, he was too broad for that. His master was too broad for that. He felt that all religions, all avatars were all included in his vision, in Sri Ramakrishna's expression. So therefore, he didn't say anything about Sri Ramakrishna, except on two occasions publicly in New York and in London in 1896. So like I was saying last week, Swami Vivekananda, notoriously reticent about speaking on his master. And he was also reticent when it came to speaking about himself and his own life, which I think are great like principles that you as a spiritual teacher shouldn't make it about you. Like you're teaching people. You're not here to tell your own life story. And of course, what you say is informed by your own life and your own teacher and your own experience of spirituality. But that's not what people necessarily need to hear. Otherwise, the whole thing becomes like an egotistic desire to be heard. That's not necessarily what we're here to do. And Swami Vivekananda was here impersonally to pass on a message, not to speak about himself. So he was very reticent about his life and his mission. He just gave teachings. Sometimes as many as 12 lectures a week he would give. Can you imagine how many hours he would have spent tirelessly teaching them duality, qualified non-duality, and of course his favorite subject, non-duality. He would teach them yoga. He would teach them bhakti, devotionalism. He would teach them the most exalted non-dual sense of working in the world through karma yoga. Like he taught all of these things to various kinds of audiences, like the intellectual elite, like Unitarian churchgoers, kind of New Agey communities, theosophists, and like Christian scientist types, and he would talk to the people. Just like he would have public lectures and all of that. And back then there was no microphone, so he would have to speak to big audiences, sometimes as many as 3 times a day, 3 lectures a day, just without a microphone. And can you imagine tirelessly his preaching and preaching and teaching and raising funds and sending them back home to India and all of that. But very rarely did he make it known what his mission was. In fact, let me just read to you a letter, actually. I didn't actually intend to read this letter, but it just so happens that I have this book handy. This is the Life of Swami Vivekananda by his Eastern and Western disciples. And there's this beautiful letter that I think I should read you. It's from the chapter called After the Parliament. Let me just quickly find the letter if you don't mind. Uh, he writes about his time after the parliament, lecturing in Chicago and in Detroit and in various places in the Midwestern region. And he even went all the way down south too. So lecturing in the south of America, in the Midwestern region, in the east of America, like that. So here's what he writes to his beloved professor, John Henry Wright, who is a Greek professor of Greek classics, I think, at Harvard University, who wrote that all important letter of introduction that allowed him to speak at the Parliament of World Religions, which if that hadn't happened, we wouldn't be here right now. Mark my words, there would not be a single commercial yoga studio in America if not for that 1893 lecture that Swami Vivekananda gave. I'm almost sure of it. So because of John Henry Wright only was he able to give that lecture. So here's what he says to John Henry Wright in a letter dated October 2nd, 1893. I am now going to be reconciled to my life here. All my life, I have been taking every circumstance as coming from him and calmly adapting myself to it. At first, in America, I was almost out of my water. I was afraid I would have to give up the accustomed way of being guided by the Lord and cater for myself. And what a horrid piece of mischief and ingratitude was that! I now clearly see that he who was guiding me on the snow tops of the Himalayas and the burning plains of India is here to help me and guide me. Glory unto him in the highest. So, I have calmly fallen into my old ways. Somebody or other gives me a shelter and food. Somebody or other comes and asks me to speak about him, and I know he sends them, and mine is to obey. And then he is supplying my necessities, and his will be done. He who rests in me and gives up all other self assertion and struggles, I carry to him whatever he needs. This is a quotation from the Gita. So it is in Asia, so in Europe, so in America, so in the deserts of India, so in the rush of business in America. For is he not here also? And if he does not, I only would take for granted that he wants that I should lay aside this 3 minutes body of clay, and I hope to lay it down gladly. Oh my God. What a profound thing. And then he goes on to write to Professor Wright on October 26th, you would be glad to know that I'm doing well here and that almost everybody has been very kind to me, except, of course, the very orthodox. Many of the men brought together here from far off lands have got projects and ideas and missions to carry out. Look at that. So he's talking about the other delegates at the Parliament of World Religions, these men brought together here from far off lands. And he's saying that they all have projects and ideas and missions to carry out. And America is the only place where there is a chance of success for everything. And that's very true, actually. America at that time, and even now, but was a very important front upon which to like advocate for your cause. If for no other reason than because American dollars went very far. So if you were able to make American money, the remittances of that could make or break your mission back home. So a lot of these people who were delegates at the Parliament of World Religions, they had a kind of like, like an agenda, right? And Katyayani, I'm so happy to see you. For whatever reason, like you being here in our conversation about like our mission seems fitting and poetically relevant. Katyayani and I have had many like late night and also breakfast pancake discussions about like what are we gonna do? Like is there gonna be like a farm with a cow? And if so, will Chakreshwar attend to it? Like we've had these conversations actually. So it's just happy to see you. I'm glad you're here.
Happy to see you too. By the way, I got the chai stains out of my pants,
Bro,
so
I swear to God, I'm gonna like get you new. pants, okay? Like yesterday, Katyani tried to trip me down the stairs and at Swami Vivekananda's house, no less, okay? Already we're all intoxicated from sitting and meditating in that room. And this fella has the gall to like try to trip me down the stairs. The only obvious reaction to that is to throw my charger into her face, right? Duh. Anyway, I had my charger, my shawl, no, not my shawl, my coat all rolled up. And so it's a kind of heavy bundle. And so I chuck it at her to throw it in her face, naturally, as the only obvious response to this. But then I didn't realize that she was holding a cup full of chai, of like hot chai. And so the chai obviously spilled all over her pants, and it was like a very incriminating sort of stain. So anyway, she had to run and hide in the car, and it was a whole fiasco. And like, look, I'm gonna get you some new clothes. Okay, well, damn. Okay, good. That's not bad.
No, it's terrible, but I forgive you.
It's terrible. Thank you. You have to. You have to. You're a sannyasini, so yeah. She took it very well. She was like, "It's okay. It's God's will." She wasn't angry at all. You know, she's a brahmacharini, so like I knew I could get away with anything with her. Anyway, so this idea, everyone who had come to the Parliament of World Religions, like obviously they're coming from India, they're coming from Japan, they're coming from all over. These men brought together from far off lands. They have got projects and ideas and missions to carry out, and America is the only place where there is a chance of success for everything. But I thought better. Look at that. Swamiji is saying, but I thought better and have given up speaking about my project entirely because I am sure now the heathen draws more than his project. So I want to go to work earnestly for my own project. So it's interesting. He has a project. He says, I want to go to work earnestly for my own project, only keeping the project in the background and working like any other lecturer. He who has brought me hither and has not left me yet will not leave me ever I am here. You will be glad to know that I am doing well and expect to do very well in the way of generating funds. Of course, I am too green in the business, but would soon learn my trade. I am very popular in Chicago, so I want to stay here a little more and get money. Okay, like what a thing, right? Like oh my God, like Swamiji is saying, look, I'm doing very well, and I expect to do very well in the way of getting money. Of course, I am too green in the business. It's like he's a sannyasin. What does he know? But then he's saying like, but I'm popular in Chicago, and I want to stay here a little more and get money. So like he was giving lectures, right? And he was paid for those lectures. Actually, he was scammed because the lecture bearer would like pay him a little bit and like scam him, obviously. And he was too unworldly. He wasn't wise in the ways of the world. He didn't understand the ways that he was being scammed. So his friends helped him get out of a difficult contract. But in any case, he would give lectures and people would pay him for those lectures. And then, interestingly, he would go to like a house of a Mrs. Leon, who he was staying with for a while, and he would just like drop all the money into her lap. And this elder woman would then arrange the money in like neat little stacks because he didn't know like what coins meant what. So he would just pour all this money into her lap, and then she would like account for him and like kind of arrange his money, and then he would collect it. And with all of that money, he started Belur back home in India, in Kolkata. Actually, not in Kolkata, like in the Bali kind of district, in the Belur district. But yeah, it's Kolkata, I guess. But he started this project called Belur the Ramakrishna Mission, all of that, using the funds that he was earnestly working for, like any other lecturer. That's a really interesting thing. Now, he had a project, he had a mission, and he said to his friend, John Henry Wright, that he meant to like work earnestly for his own project. Um, and this is important, he didn't feel it necessary to tell anybody about it. You know, he was just happy to do work, just to labor and work like anybody else. You know, and another thing, he was against this idea of like collecting funds from people for his mission, because that's usually how shady things happen, you know? People just want money. And these days, oh my God, like we live in a kind of grift economy, right? Where just people put their GoFundMe's on Instagram and they expect everyone to just give them money for nothing. Swamiji wasn't like that. He didn't want to beg in that way. He wanted to give something. And as he lectured, he was duly compensated for it. Sometimes not really. Sometimes he was had, but in all cases, he had this project in the back of his mind. Now, what was that project? What was that mission? Now I want to make a claim. It was never his mission. It was never his project. It was God's play enacting itself through his Swadharma. So we know that when his master Sri Ramakrishna died, he spent some time with his brother monks in abject poverty, living in a haunted house in the Barnagar monastery. I visited and it's still spooky. In fact, I was having a bidi with somebody outside, a dear friend of mine, Govindo, who was driving around for us. You know, he was driving us. And so I was there with Govindo and we were having a bidi looking at the house. And I was talking about Barnagar in Barnagar days. Now, Govindo doesn't really speak English. He speaks only Bengali, and I don't really speak Bengali, so we're just having this long conversation. But it was very funny because then he would look at the house and he would go, Jin Bhari, Jin Bhari. Bhari means house, Jin means ghost, right? So he was saying like it's a ghost house. And it still is. It's a haunted place, and that's why it was so cheap. So these boys were living in this haunted house, nothing to eat for days on end, and they were doing harsh austerities. But you have to remember, they were traditional sannyasins in the sense that they spent all their lives doing sadhana, but they also had this desire to walk around. Because the traditional sannyasin ideal in India is that you become an itinerant person. You like wander about. In fact, the word pravrajaka means wandering. So these are wandering type people, and then naturally, pure is the river that flows, pure is the monk who goes. There's a saying in our country. So naturally, they all one by one started going on these adventures. Swamiji would go to Varanasi quite a few times, and then he went to Vrindavan, and then he would wander about India, and like he left, um, and wouldn't come back for the next however many years until he had visited America and London and whatnot. So you can think of America and London being a kind of like part of his wandering monk days. It wasn't just limited to India. But there's some beautiful stories here, and I highly recommend the two-volume set, The Life of Swami Vivekananda by his Eastern and Western disciples. You'll see all sorts of really interesting episodes, like when he gets caught in a house of sex-worshipping tantrics who are trying to break his brahmacharya in order to get spiritual power. Like you'll see all these various crazy adventures that he was on. Sometimes he was living on the streets in abject poverty with nothing to eat. The very next day, he would be dined sumptuously in the court of some great Maharaja. Like it's a wonderful traveling life of Swami Vivekananda. He would just sit, and because of his greatness, because of his spirituality, he would attract crowds. So this would happen in northwestern India, like in Rajputana, the historical Rajput stronghold, the home, the seat of Indian chivalry. There in like Gujarat and the Punjab, like in northwestern India, he would just like rent these rooms sometimes with what little money he had, or he would be the guest in somebody's home, and then people would just show up. By the hundreds they would come from morning to evening, and sometimes all through the night. They would sit there and just listen to him speak. He would hold forth on topics like Advaita Vedanta, on Hindu ethics, and importantly also on like social issues and political issues. He would talk about the British and about like the colonial project. And he would talk about all these things. He was very, very learned. And so naturally, he attracted all kinds of people. Simple village people who were interested in learning about spirituality and who just wanted to see a sannyasin, but also very quote unquote distinguished, sophisticated, scholarly types who were often in the aristocratic elite. So he attracted all sorts of crowds, and he would all day long speak to them. And he was going from Western India down into Maharashtra, Western India, into the Deccan. And then from there, he came into Kerala, and then to Mysore, and then the Tamil heartland. He went to Madras, all of that. And in Madras, I'm proud to say, as a Tamilian, they really knew who he was. Like everywhere else, he was, of course, a great person. But it was in Madras that he was first recognized. And it was Madras, believe it or not, that sent him first to America. Because they were the ones that raised the subscription to send him to the Parliament of World Religions. But before he went, he was giving talks like in the public to communities like the Triplicane Society and whatnot, like this up and coming youth of Madras who were like British educated, but were also interested in a kind of nationalistic ideal of rejuvenating their country along Vedic and Tantric and, like along traditional lines. Like they were really attracted to the Swami Vivekananda. Anyway, he had come to hear about the Parliament of World Religions while he was wandering around India. Many kings were aware of the Parliament of World Religions, and as we know, he was the guest in many kings' homes, right? Also, it's nice to see you, Patrick. I was just thinking about you today. We missed you last week on Friday. I was like, where's Patrick? And there you are. It's good to see you. So he was the guest in the homes of many, many kings. Naturally, these Maharajas, they knew about the Parliament of World Religions, and so they told him about it. They were like, look, across the sea in America, there's going to be this event where people from all over the world will come and speak about their religions. You would be the perfect person for such a thing, Swami. You're so eloquent. Your English is perfect. If you would only speak in front of all of them, you would show India its own worth, and you would be able to broadcast to the rest of the world the worth and value of Indian spirituality, which at the time British colonial missionaries were trying to erode. They were trying to destroy it, to call it all superstition, to brainwash the Indian people into giving up its 9,000-year-old history, at least 9,000-year-old history, as a kind of pipe dream. And it's a critical project for India to remind it of its dignity. And the way to do that would be to go and preach Indian ideas on the international platform. So anyway, they were all interested in sending Swamiji. And one Maharaja even gave the money for it. And you know what Swamiji did? He rejected it at once. I just want to make this very clear, okay? Swami Vivekananda got the funds from a Maharaja to go to the Parliament of World Religions, and he rejected the funds for two reasons. The first reason was because he was not sure whether or not it was God's will. It's very important. He didn't want to do it because it was his project or because it was his mission or his ambition. He only wanted to do it if he knew for a fact that God wanted him to. And so that was one reason why he didn't take the money and go. Another reason was because he felt like if he was going to go on behalf of the Indian people, then he better get the money from them and not from some Raja. Isn't that an interesting idea? You might think like, oh, but why take money from the people? No, because he was going for the people and he wanted to represent them, not some Raja. I think his understanding was if he took money from some Raja, he might be beholden to that Raja, or that Raja might claim him as his one. Like, oh, look, I'm the one who gave the money to send this guy, so I'm great. And Swamiji didn't want some Raja to be great. He wanted the people to remember their own greatness. So he felt like if I'm to go, then it's the people that should send me. Isn't that such a beautiful and kind of a almost Marxist idea, but a very modern and progressive idea? So anyway, he didn't take this money from the Raja. And later, the boys of Madras, who must never be forgotten in the story of Swami Vivekananda, because they were the first ones to recognize him. The boys of Madras started a subscription, believe it or not, like legitimately like a Patreon, I kid you not. It's like, look, you can subscribe any amount of money you want. All the lectures are free. You can come and listen to the lectures to your heart's delight, but whatever you feel like contributing, you can just subscribe and you can like write in whatever amount you want. So you get a form and it's perfectly fine to put 0 rupees. But if you wanted, you could put 2 rupees, and so you would commit to every month giving 2 rupees or something like that. And a Maharaja actually committed quite a bit, like 2,000 rupees. I forget the exact number, but obviously the aristocratic, wealthy members of society who were fans of Swami Vivekananda, they subscribed and they were obviously able to pitch in more money. And like that, a subscription was started, and this is the crazy thing, you guys. This is mind blowing. The money was generated, and he was finally able to go to America. And you know what he did? He said, well, why don't you just distribute all this money to the poor? Hmm. Still, he wasn't able to do it. It's really interesting. He really just wasn't sure whether or not it was his will. Hey, Katyayani, studying Sanskrit. Very good. You're on book 2 now, I see. You're on the green book, not the blue book. Very good. Look at that. Look, making some swift progress. Good. So soon you'll be able to read all my tattoos perfectly. So that's her training. Like she has to read the tattoos, which admittedly are kind of hard because the font is not that good. Anyway,
I got Kali right.
yeah, you got Kali. You got that word. No, to your credit, you got quite a few words. No, it was very small font and. So, Swamiji got this money, and you can see that's a sign, right? Like, look, they are all telling you to go. They've given you the money just like you asked. They generated the money among the people, and here it is. Now go. Swamiji was like, no, 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 just give this money away to the poor. Because again, he got cold feet in a sense. He wasn't sure that it was his mission, and this would torment him. Is it my will or your will, God? Do you want me to do this or do I want to do this? Like, what exactly should I do? And like that, he was agonizing over this for like months and months and months. It's really interesting. And there's this beautiful scene where he spends 3 days meditating on a rock in the southernmost point of India. It's called Kanyakumari, and the rock now is called the Vivekananda Shila. It's a rock dedicated to Vivekananda, and there's like a shrine there, and it's near the Kanyakumari temple. Anyway, he swam through quote unquote shark infested waters. When I said this to Vijaya, she was like, "Why did you say infested? The sharks live there." Infested is maybe not the right word, but anyway, there are a lot of sharks there, and he swam across the water, and he didn't have any food. For like 3 days, it said that he just sat there in meditation. Can you imagine? For 3 days, he sat at the furthest southernmost tip of India, having traveled the length and breadth of India and seen India for himself. And when he was sitting there for 3 days, he was meditating, he had a vision. And he saw Sri Ramakrishna standing before him and pointing to America. So God himself, or at least, he felt that Sri Ramakrishna was an avatar, God himself. God himself came in the form of Sri Ramakrishna and told him to go to America, and still he doubted. Isn't that so beautiful? He was like, why? Like he couldn't quite accept it. He didn't know whether it was his own hallucination or an actual vision. These days, a person has a little bit of a dream in which they think they see God and they tell everyone they're a messiah, right? But even Swamiji, who had a direct experience of God in meditation with eyes open telling him to go, even he was cautious about it. Can you imagine? So anyway, then he had this a more important revelation, arguably. And in that revelation, he realized, what if all the sannyasins of India were to plunge into activity? What if, instead of merely sitting in caves and meditating, they were to worship God in the form of the hungry, in the form of the sick, in the form of the unlearned? Wouldn't that be the proper way to worship? Again, this is not a humanitarian or socialist project, it's a religious revelation. Swami Vivekananda realizes that God is the pariah, and that a person claiming to worship God, to love God, is not really doing so until he or she does unto the least of ye what you would also do unto me. And Swamiji thought, here I have a nation full of saints and sages and rishis. Why don't I like bring them all together and have them work for the good of India? To teach the unlearned, to bring medicine to the sick, to bring food to the hungry, like that, to bring women's education to the downtrodden millions of India. He really, had this Buddha heart, like he really felt for everyone. And now he had a mission. But then he thought, this is what the Parliament of World Religions is for. I could go there and then give the Americans the thing that they most need, spirituality, and I could bring back Western education, like Western organization, Western systems of politics, and all these things that like work for the West. Like maybe we can apply it in India. We can bring the best of the West to India, and we can bring the best of the East, which India has always been the special stronghold for, to the West. And that way, the whole world will become united. Like both sides of the brain, if you will, the two hemispheres will come together in one complete person. That's a beautiful vision. And because he had that vision on Kanyakumari, like that's why he took the parliament seriously. But even then, he was very, very cautious about whether or not it was his plan, his ambition, or his master's plan. So just notice, it's very unlikely that he got to go. He kept rejecting the money, but finally he decided to go. They got a bunch of money together. In fact, the Maharaja of Khetri was very important. He didn't really take money from Maharajas, but the Maharaja of Khetri gave him a very, very good purse and also decked him out in a very beautiful outfit for which he's known. The wine red cloak with the yellow sash and the yellow turban. Like his look, Swami Vivekananda's look, was actually because of the Maharaja of Khetri. It's a very interesting thing. So anyway, he got the purse, he got the outfit, he was put on a boat on Bombay and sent off. And he went on a great journey. By the way, he went to China for a little while and he visited a Chinese Buddhist monastery. And the Chinese Buddhists were all like, Kabach, Kabach, Kabach. He couldn't understand any word that they were saying except this, Kabach, which meant Kavacham. Kavacham means protective armor. And his translator said, yes, because you're a monk from India, they have great reverence for you. They're asking you for a magic spell to protect against ghosts and other evil spirits. And Swamiji actually pulled out a piece of paper and wrote Om on it and gave it to them as a kavacham, and then he was allowed to see the inside of the Chinese monastery. Okay, having said all of that, he went on this journey through Japan and through China and through Malaysia. He came to Malaysia, he came to Singapore. He saw so much of the world and he would write these letters to people. In 1893, like when he was sailing in June and July like that, he would write these letters to people and tell them of all the things that he saw. And he was learning so much. He would say to people like, we should visit China, we should visit Japan, because you can learn a lot from seeing how the Japanese and Chinese live their lives. We can implement some of this in our own life. Like that, he was always ready to learn from anyone. And like that, you can see the mission is sort of, how do you say, developing in his mind, even while he's traveling around on his way to America. He lands in Vancouver. This is very interesting. He first comes to the West in Canada, actually, so Rohanji, but on the other coast. He landed on Vancouver, and then he went through the Rockies. He took a train through the Rockies, and it's believed, actually, the Eastern Western Disciples book argues that this is when he met a very important contact named one Miss Kate Sanborn. Very important lady. We'll talk about her later. But he meets her on the train, and she's attracted to his outfit above all, but also to his personality. Everyone loved him, by the way, naturally. When a flower blooms, its fragrance never fails to delight. So because he was a fully realized master of spirituality, his vibes were excellent, right? He literally had been aura farming for the last like God knows how long, sitting and meditating in caves. Now, obviously, everyone is so charmed by his personality and they're all wanting to talk to him and all. And so he made a very important friend, actually, on that train ride from Vancouver to I think to Chicago. Yeah, Vancouver straight to Chicago, maybe through Michigan or something, but he went straight to Chicago. But in any case, when he got to Chicago, he had already made this contact named Kate Sandburn. He gets there, he stays in a hotel, and he spends some time visiting the World's Fair. He's a stranger in a strange land, doesn't know anybody, but he's looking at everything. He's trying to learn as much as he can from all the things that are being presented at the World's Fair at the time. There's something going on, like a convention going on. Anyway, Chicago became too expensive. he went to the office of the Parliament of World Religions and he had realized to his shock and chagrin that actually you had to put in an application months in advance and the applications were all closed, the deadlines were all expired, and they were not admitting any new delegates, any new lecturers on the platform of the Parliament of World Religions. And like Swamiji, he did all of this to come here to speak at this event, and now he's realizing that he didn't have the right paperwork, he didn't have any letters of introduction, he really didn't have any right to be there, and he didn't have any prospects of speaking at the Parliament of World Religions. So his mission was a failure and he was heartbroken. It was a really interesting thing. He was like, he was so despondent when he realized that the whole thing was a failure. Anyway, he also realized that he didn't have the money to stay in Chicago. Things were just too expensive in America. And the purse that the Maharaja of Khetri had given him was quickly dwindling by the day. And so what he had to do was go to so from Chicago he had to go to Boston, which was much cheaper. And some say that on his way to Boston, that's when he met Mrs. Kate Sanborn. But anyway, according to new research, it says that he had already met her in on the train ride from Vancouver to Chicago, and there she invited him to come and stay with her in Boston. And he thought, look, I could be this lady's guest, and she's a very prominent person, and so he would be able to meet people through her, and also he would be able to save some money because if he was staying with her, he wouldn't have to like pay for the expensive hotels. And by the way, it was very hard for him to get the hotel because he was black. Like, I mean, at that time in America, if you were that color, it's very hard to find lodgings anywhere. He couldn't eat at certain restaurants, obviously, because of that time period, you know? It was very hard for him. So he thought, look, I'm just going to be this lady's guest. And that's what he did. He went to Boston. He wrote her a letter and she welcomed him into her home. And like that, he met her brother. I think Franklin Sanborn or something, or Frederick Sanborn, I forget his name exactly. But he was a very prominent poet and he had many contacts. And like that, one day by day, one by one, all these intellectuals would come to listen to Swami Vivekananda. And then came the next very important contact, John Henry Wright. And this was a professor of Greek in the Harvard University at the time, a very prominent intellectual of that cultural period. And so when he met the Swami, he was so impressed. He was so smitten by Swami Vivekananda. And by the way, in Boston, Swamiji actually gave a few talks in Unitarian churches and stuff. Like, for instance, let me just pull out my notes app. Actually, I have this somewhere, weirdly enough. So yeah, here it is. Uh, Okay, he landed in Vancouver July 25th. July 30th, he landed in Chicago. August 26th and 27th, that's when he stayed. He actually stayed with John Henry Wright in Massachusetts. And he gave his first public lecture. A lot of people think his first public lecture was on the stage at the Parliament of World Religions in 1893. It wasn't. His first public lecture, according to new research, is actually August 27th at the village church in Ennisquam. And Mrs. Wright, the wife of this John Henry Wright, wrote in a letter, these staid New Englanders took up a collection for a heathen college in India to be run strictly on heathen principles. She was remarking with great delight. He had that effect upon this church-going audience that they were so inspired by what he said that they were willing to send funds to India to set up a school for like women or children or something along like Vedic lines. Anyway, August 28th and September 4th. So from August 28th to September 4th, he stayed in Salem with a Miss Woods. And he lectured again August 28th at the Thought and Work Club at the Wesley Church. And again on Sunday, September 3rd at the East Church. And he used to give satsangs in Mrs. Woods' garden. So like that, he was already attracting a group. Remember, when the flower blooms, it never fails to draw towards it hungry, thirsty bees. Like that. So these intellectuals and various people became tuned to Swami Vivekananda and they started coming. And then in Saratoga, New York on September 4th, he spoke three times, not once, but three times before the convention of the American Social Science Association. Because Mr. Franklin, it's Franklin Sanborn, he was the secretary of this place. And he spoke twice at private events in this area in Saratoga, New York. So that's really interesting, right? Like, and the three talks, by the way, two of them we have the title. The first one is called The Mohammedan Rule in India, and the second one is called The Use of Silver in India. You know, because at that time the silver standard was threatening. But anyway, so he importantly he was already like way before the Parliament of World Religions, which convened on September 11th, 1893. He was already like giving all these talks, and so John Henry Wright was another key contact. See, without Kate Sanborn, who he met by chance on a train from Vancouver to Chicago, he never would have gotten that invitation to Boston. If he hadn't gone to Boston, he would never have met this Professor John Henry Wright. And if he hadn't met Professor John Henry Wright, he wouldn't have gotten the letter of introduction, which allowed him to get into the Parliament of World Religion. So John Henry Wright famously said, "What credentials? To ask you for your credentials, Swami," because Swami had said, "Look, I can't speak there. I don't have the credentials." And John Henry Wright was shocked to hear this. To ask you for credentials, Swami, is like asking for the sun's right to shine. And so he wrote a letter to the parliament and to the Barrows, Professor Barrows, who was the head of the parliament, and he said, "Here is a man who is greater than all of our college professors put together," or something like that. And so that letter of introduction was such a glowing recommendation that Swami Vivekananda, despite all odds, now here's the point I want to make. There's a reason why I'm telling this story. Despite all odds, he got a position at the Parliament of World Religions. Now this next part is crazy, you guys. He gets on a train to come to Chicago to speak at the Parliament of World Religions. Somebody on the train, by the way, a businessman, tells him that he will tell him where to go when they get there. But when they get there, the businessman was too hurried that he kind of rushes out. And so he didn't have his friend. Seems like misfortune, right? But then he found that he had also lost the directions. And now he's stranded. And the train stops in this German quarter of town in Chicago, and nobody speaks a word of English there. So he wasn't able to get any food to eat. All the restaurants scared him away because he was black and also because he didn't speak German. And he would just wander about. And so all he knew how to do was go and knock from door to door like a sannyasin would in India. But even servants of these mansions would slam the door in his face because here was a queer looking fellow, in the sense of the old word queer, like that's the word that they used at that time to describe him, with his turban and with his outfit, and like knocking at their door asking for food. Americans don't know about this kind of sannyasin beggar culture. So anyway, he's knocking on doors. Nobody wants to help him. So he sits down dejected. Check this out. A series of synchronicities, right, brought him to that place and that time, and he royally fucked up. Like now he can't find his way to the Parliament of World Religions. Imagine he's probably shaking with stress. Upon his shoulders, the work of Sri Ramakrishna, the expectations of his brother disciples, the crying of millions of downtrodden Indians, all depending on him, all resting upon his shoulders. And now here he is, sitting slumped under the summer heat outside of a church on Lake Avenue in Chicago, totally dejected and lost, a strange man in a strange world. And as fate would have it, just across the street, the door opens and a woman comes out and randomly just asks him, "Sir, are you here for the Parliament of World Religions? Are you a delegate?" Just by his dress, by his outfit, she was able to identify him. And he said, "Yes, but I've lost the address." And she said, "Don't worry, I got you." It was actually Mrs. Hale, who we'd later call Mother Church, and her husband, Mr. Hale, Father Pope, sorry. He was associated with all of these leading intellectuals at the time. So they brought him into the house. He made very good friends with Mary Hale. So notice, it's all part of karma. It was Mary Hale's karma and her sister's karma to be close friends with Swami Vivekananda. Without losing the address, without getting lost, without becoming dejected and sitting on the sidewalk in utter defeat, he would have never met some of his most important contacts in the United States. Do you see how every step of the way was guided by providence, by a divine hand? That's how we know it wasn't his mission. And then, now he finally makes it to the Parliament of World Religions. When he gets there, this is the final thing. He's too afraid to speak. His number was like 30 something in the list of people who were going to give an opening address. But every time it was his turn, he would say, "Not right now." Again, he would say, "Not right now." And "not right now," because he was shy. Like imagine, it's a hall, by the way, in the Art Institute of Chicago that can fit 6,000 people. So there are like thousands of people, and they're not just like any people, right? They're all the leaders of society at the time, the top intellectuals, very critical men and women of letters. So therefore, it's a pretty tough crowd. Okay, and so he's next to people who have been preparing speeches for months, who have known about this parliament for years maybe, and he's there with no speech prepared. He doesn't know what he's going to say, and so naturally he has cold feet, right? So Swami Vivekananda, he's like so afraid and he's pushing it back, and finally the people didn't even think he was going to speak. The organizers were afraid that he wouldn't even get up. But finally it was time for him to get up. And so he said a prayer to Saraswati and he got up, and obviously what happened next is literally history. And he opened his speech with "My sisters and brothers of America." And this is so interesting, you guys. This is kind of weird. But suddenly, before he even said another word, the whole audience got up and gave him a standing ovation. Isn't that weird? He hadn't really said anything beyond "My sisters and brothers of America." Now, some people say, oh, it's because he was the first one to address them with such intimacy. He was the first one to not have any like flowery opening or any kind of speech or anything. He just kind of came up so naturally. Like there are many kind of explanations for why the audience reacted this way. But I think because it was an important moment. It was God's moment. God herself wanted this to happen. And of course, God in the form of all of these people, they were sensitive to that. They immediately understood when that message was given. And so they responded to it. They got up. You see, again, their minds, like I said earlier, were already resonating with the ideas that Swami Vivekananda had yet to present. Isn't that so interesting? Like they didn't even know what he was going to say, and yet they already knew that what he had to say were already their thoughts, was already their thoughts. Like this idea of harmony of all religions, the oneness of existence, the innate divinity of the human soul, all of that. Like this was the message that they were waiting to hear, and no one else was able to give that message to them because everyone only spoke for their own sect, their own project. But Swami Vivekananda didn't mention his life. He didn't mention his master. He just impersonally allowed himself to become the voice of not any particular religion, but of all religions. And like that, we're all sitting here now, some 60 of us on a Zoom call talking about these things. None of this would happen. Again, like, may lightning strike me down right now if I'm bearing false witness to this fact. None of this would happen. Nothing. No Swami Yogananda Giri Self-Realization Fellowship. Don't even think about it. All of that was modeled after Vivekananda. It's great, but it was modeled after Vivekananda. None of the 60s Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, like none of that. None of it would have happened if Swami Vivekananda hadn't opened the doors first. He was the first one to really, really talk about Eastern ideas in this country and in London and whatnot. So anyway, this was a moment for all of us. And it was God's moment. It was God's will. Because look at all the unlikeliness of it. Like every step of the way, it was like pulling teeth for him, and yet it was inevitable all along, this inexorable march from Baranagar to the stage in Chicago at the Art Institute at the Parliament of World Religions. And so he took the place by storm. He gave this powerful lecture, just a short lecture, and then he would lecture like, oh my God, like I mean it's crazy. Like let me just like quickly just for fun just show you what he did. Like when he was there, he gave his September 11th talk, of course, right? In the afternoon. But then he also spoke at various receptions that were like held for all the various delegates who came. So he commented upon the condition of women in his country on September 14th at Potter Parma's reception. September 15th, he gave that talk, Why We Disagree. September 19th or 18th, he gave the talk on Hinduism. It's called the Paper on Hinduism, one of the most important things that he contributed to Hinduism. It's available in volume 1 of the complete works. September 22nd, he gave the Orthodox Hinduism and the Vedanta philosophy. He also spoke on the modern religions in India in hall number 3, which was a kind of like side thing that was going on. And then also in the afternoon, he gave Women in Oriental Religion in hall number 7. And he gave a Q&A on September 23rd. He spoke on September 24th at the Third Unitarian Church in Chicago on the love of God. September 26th, on Tuesday, one more talk before the Parliament, Buddhism, the fulfillment of Hinduism. And finally, September 27th, he gave an address at the final session. So he was speaking a lot, not just at the Parliament, but also in these conference rooms like that were also convening during the Parliament, but also at like people's parties. I think that's kind of cool that people had him get up and give speeches, like toasts, if you will, at these parties. And he took this opportunity to like talk about women's education, etc., etc. So it's clear that he had a mission. But again, it was really unlikely that it would come to pass. And I think this is the point I want to make. Whether we call it free will or determinism, it seems like something is acting through Swami Vivekananda. His mission was never his mission. And although he uses words like my project, my vision, I mean to go on working earnestly for my mission, he never really means it. He knows that all the while it's his master's mission, and he's merely consigning himself to the will of God. That's why he says, mine is to obey. He alone it is who sends me people who ask me to speak here and speak there. Mine it is to obey. Right? So therefore, what is our mission? See, Swamiji, in one place, he said, my life and mission. He gave this talk at the Shakespeare Club in 1900, like I was saying earlier. So you didn't think I would go back to that, did you? No. So he gave this talk, and he was willing to speak on his life and his mission. Then he gave another talk in Madras called My Plan of Campaign. And he would like write letters to everyone talking about his various designs and missions. It seemed like he had a plan. He had something in mind, and he was willing to die to carry it out. He was a reformer. He met all the criteria that we talked about last week. He had found out a system, a solution. He felt truly in the core of his being for everyone, and he was willing to give his life for his mission. So he was a missionary. He was a visionary. He clearly was exercising his free will to do something that he felt would be good to do. However, and this is the point I want to make, although he would say things like this, my plan of campaign or my life and mission, it was always his master's life and mission. So, insofar as you ask me, what's your mission? Nothing but this, to be a foot soldier in Swami Vivekananda's mission. Never mind who lives or dies, who falls, never look back, march on, the Lord is our general, never mind cold, never mind food, never mind water, and never mind money, it will fall from the heavens. March on, the Lord is your general. Those are my marching orders. I have no will of my own. Insofar as I can avoid that, I would like to. I just want to do Swamiji's work. I'm consigned wholly to Swami Vivekananda, not even to Ramakrishna or Sarada Devi. They're great and all, but I'm a Swamiji boy through and through. Like I'm in his army. And if he tells me to do something, even if Ramakrishna tells me not to do it, I'll do it because my loyalties are with Swamiji. Swamiji, like I'm a, what do you call it? I stand Swamiji. And of course, never will that contradiction appear because Swamiji is nothing but Sri Ramakrishna. He's a mouthpiece for Sri Ramakrishna. But that being said, maybe like those boys in Madras in the 1890s, I too have felt that call, that call that many of you feel when you read Swami Vivekananda. And once you like hear it, you can't unhear it, and it's no longer your life. So that happened to me maybe in 2019 when my grandfather handed me that biography on Swami Vivekananda by Swami Nikhilananda ji. I just read that once. Before I even finished that biography, I like put it down. I was like, I'm done. Like, I'm not interested in being a rock star in a rock and roll band anymore. Like, nothing mattered anymore from that point on but to do Swamiji's work. And who knows what that work is? So if anybody asks me what is my mission, I don't know. Talk to the boss. I have no mission. I'm merely an employee or merely a foot soldier in a much bigger effort, which I don't really even understand. I just take marching orders. I'm not at all like a general in this army. I don't even know what's going on. I just do what I'm told to do by Swamiji moment by moment. That's it. And all I ever want to do is represent his message and his life and his teaching. So therefore, what is my mission? Don't ask me. Go to Swami Vivekananda and look at his My Plan of Campaign or look at his My Life and Mission. That's my mission. Whatever he wants to do, I'm doing. That we'll say it that way. But then again, obviously there are things that are like obviously if Swamiji was here now, he might have said things a bit differently. Obviously there are things that are unique to our day and age. Like for instance, he couldn't talk about Kali back then. But maybe now, given the cultural acceptance that we're starting to feel all around the world and given the demand for Mā Kali, clearly you can see that energy, that Mā Kali energy is coming through, and more is it now appropriate to talk about Tantra, something that Swami Vivekananda obviously couldn't talk about in public. So he told Sister Nivedita, obviously his foremost disciple. And by the way, Nivedita would sign all her letters N of RKV. Nivedita of Ramakrishna Vivekananda. For a time, I did so also. I would sign my emails and my letters N of RKV. Nishantanata of Ramakrishna Vivekananda, because that's really what I feel myself to be. So too with Nivedita. Like once you meet a Ramakrishna, once you meet a Vivekananda, done. Like if you get them, if you understand that it's over. Like then you will be a something of RKV like that. That's our feeling. That's our like you say, religious feeling, sentiment. But that we like not to speak about in public because religion is like a penis. Don't whip it out in public. Like keep it to yourself, kind of like that. So this is our religion, our faith. My faith is that Swami Vivekananda and Sri Ramakrishna are it. Like their message is the message of the Yuga, and I, like the early Christians, fully believe in my prophet, in the prophet Paramahansa Sri Ramakrishna. But I don't expect that you should. I really don't think that you need to accept him as a prophet. I'm not here to preach a religion. Rather, I want to live and die for the message, the principle, not the person. So like that, I can't answer the question, what is my mission? For my mission is naturally going to be aligned with whatever Swami Vivekananda, Sarada Devi, and Sri Ramakrishna want. But again, in our theology, we understand that behind Ramakrishna, behind Vivekananda, behind Sarada Devi, actually Sarada Devi, is none other than Kali. That Kali we understand to be Brahman, the energy of Brahman by which this universe appears, in which this play is going on. So when I say I'm devoted wholly to Swami Vivekananda, I'm saying I'm devoted to Kali and that particular expression of Kali, which is called Vivekananda. In fact, never mind. I was going to share an anecdote, but maybe I'll save that for the Q&A. Let me just do this. I want to close the lecture now by saying Swami Vivekananda was very clear about his plan of campaign. He was very clear about his life and mission. And so we don't have any, insofar as we are merely foot soldiers in that, right? But what are we doing? Essentially, I want to refer you to Swami Vivekananda's complete works in volume 1, Sister Nivedita, his foremost disciple. She writes a beautiful introduction, which I highly recommend that you all read. And in fact, I'll read it out to you on the 9/11, September 11th. Usually I'll read that introduction. It's about his speech at the parliament and his life and his mission. And she says something really interesting. She says, the truths that Swami Vivekananda spoke about would have been true and equally authentic had he never been born. I think that's very important, because he's impersonal. He's not there to talk about his life or his master even. He's there to represent the eternal traditions of, I'm not going to say India. He's there to represent Sanatana Dharma, which is true in every religion. He's there to represent Christians and Muslims. He's not there for his master or his lineage or himself. So in that sense, what he's teaching, the Upanishads, etc., they would be equally true and equally authentic had he never been born. That's a very, very important point, I think. So what did he add? He was able to show a unity and a harmony. Heck, I'm so sorry. Like Sister Nivedita, she says it way better than I could. So why am I doing this? Let me just tell you what she said. She says here, importantly, the Swami Vivekananda would have been less than he was had anything in this evangel of Hinduism been his own. I love that word, not evangelist, but evangel. Isn't that a beautiful word? Evangel. So the Swami Vivekananda would have been less than he was had anything in this evangel of Hinduism been his own. Like the Krishna of the Gita, like Buddha, like Shankaracharya, like every great teacher that Indian thought has known, his sentences are laden with quotations from the Vedas and the Upanishads. It's not the Vivekananda method. He's such a personality, but so impersonal. Everything that he says is drawn from the Vedas and the Upanishads, and he will quote them often. He stands merely as the revealer, the interpreter to India of the treasures that she herself possesses in herself. The truths he preaches would have been as true had he never been born. Nay, more, they would have been equally authentic. The difference would have lain in their difficulty of access, in their want of modern clearness and incisiveness of statement, and in their loss of mutual coherence and unity. Had he not lived, texts that today will carry the bread of life to thousands might have remained the obscure dispute of scholars. He taught with authority and not as one of the pundits, for he himself had plunged into the depths of the realization which he preached, and he came back like Ramanuja only to tell its secrets to the pariah, to the outcast, and to the foreigner. And yet, this statement that his teaching holds nothing new is not absolutely true. It must never be forgotten that it was the Swami Vivekananda who, while proclaiming the sovereignty of the Advaita philosophy, as including that experience in which all is one, without a second, also added to Hinduism the doctrine that Dvaita, Vishisht Advaita, and Advaita are but three phases or stages in a single development. This is part and parcel of the still greater and more simple doctrine that the many and the one are the same reality, perceived by the mind at different times and in different attitudes. Or as Sri Ramakrishna expressed, God is both with form and without form. And he is that which includes both form and formlessness. And it is this which adds its crowning significance to our master's life. For here he becomes the meeting point, not only of East and West, but also of past and future. If the many and the one be indeed the same reality, then is not all modes of worship, then it is not all modes of worship alone, but equally all modes of work, all modes of struggle, all modes of creation, which are paths to realization. No distinction henceforth between sacred and secular. To labor is to pray, to conquer is to renounce. Life itself is religion. To have and to hold is as stern a trust as to quit and to avoid. This is the realization which made Vivekananda, the great preacher of karma, not as divorced from, but as expressing jnana and bhakti. To him, the workshop, the study, the farmyard, and the field are as true and fit scenes for the meeting of God with man as the cell of the monk or the door of the temple. To him, there is no difference between service of man and worship of God, between strength and faith, between righteousness and spirituality. All his words, from one point of view, read as a commentary upon this central conviction. Art, science, and religion, he once said, are but three different ways of expressing a single truth. But in order to understand this, we must have the theory of Advaita. So this much for now. The idea that Swami Vivekananda said nothing new. And yet, there was something new in the way he presented it. At the very least, in terms of giving access to what might forever have been hidden away from people. So I think this is our mission. Above all, to give access to things that otherwise we might not be able to access. So, for instance, the tantric tradition has been very underrepresented. And not only that, actively suppressed in the narrative about Sri Ramakrishna, Sarada Devi, and Vivekananda. We don't really understand Vivekananda's devotion to Kali because it's not often spoken about. We don't understand what it means for Sri Ramakrishna to be a priest of Kali. Isn't that interesting? That when we talk about Sri Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, and Sarada, we seem content to leave out Tantra. And that made sense in the 1890s. Already, it was so controversial to tell Americans that they weren't filthy sinners meant for hell. Already, it was hard to remind them of their own innate divinity. How much harder would it have been to lead with an image of a black skinned, four armed deity wielding weapons, garlanded heads, sticking her tongue out sensually, covered in blood, surrounded by corpses and jackals on the cremation ground, standing on her husband, whom she desires sexual union, in whom she's looking for sexual union. Like, what the fuck? That's not something that the American or British audiences then could handle. And even now, it's not something that many people can handle. So, that being said, it's not the time for Kali in 1890s. Obviously not. Kali is coming through in a different way. But now, more than ever, people are demanding the religion of the motherhood of God, which was so important to Sri Ramakrishna, which was so important to Vivekananda. And you won't hear this from Vedantists. Vedantists don't like to talk about devotion. They underplay it because they think they're too good for devotion. They don't want to talk about Kali because they're still mired in 1950s America in which they think we don't need these cultural forms. See, Vedanta is stuck in the past in many, many, many ways. It's stuck in the past because it only seems to be old people who are running the show right now. And the young people come along and they're indoctrinated by all these old people into some kind of transcendentalist Vedanta stripped of all of its devotion, mysticism, tantra, stripped of its Kali. How can you have Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, and Sarada Devi without Kali? Heck, how can you have them without Bengal? Many of these people who are in the lineage of Sri Ramakrishna have never themselves been to Bengal. They've never gone to Dakshineshwar. They've never been to the Birbhum district, stayed in Eka Chakra with the Bowels, whom Sri Ramakrishna cherished. They've never been to Tarapith and stood before Mā Tara, whom Ramakrishna would often sing about. They've never been on Bengali soil. They've never breathed the Kolkata air. They've never walked the sanctified, hallowed ground of Dakshineshwar. And yet they think they can talk to you about Ramakrishna, that they can tell you about Vedanta. What do they know of Vedanta? All they know is Ramana Maharshi read that book one time. Okay, now they can talk Vedanta. What do they know? They can barely pronounce the words correctly. I'm not faulting them for that, but few of these people ever took the time to learn the very cultures they represent. And if you present this without its culture, without its devotion, without its mysticism, without its tantra, that might have been good at a certain time, but not now. Now, it's probably the time to talk about Bengal, to talk about the bowels, right? It's probably time to talk about Kali. And maybe that's the kind of update that I envision for our tradition. I want to bring Kali back to the center of the narrative. I want to remind everyone that Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa Dev was a priest in a Kali temple first. And I want to remind everyone that at every point of his journey, he kept Kali with him. The people in the order today will tell you, oh, Kali just started off with Kali. I kid you not, I asked a monk something like this. And he said, oh, you know how Christianity and Islam, they use the language of a previous faith, like their Abrahamic faith, so they talk in a Judaic way. Similarly, Sri Ramakrishna talks about Kali because that's what he started off with. I think this is a very dangerous thing to say. Because what you're saying is that Kali is not Sri Ramakrishna's absolute reality, which contradicts very much Ramakrishna's own teaching that what you call Brahman, I call Kali. Importantly, Kali is the energy of Brahman who creates and maintains and destroys the world, who plays in this world as this world. And so if you get rid of Kali, you get rid of the Shakta Advaita that was a very important part of not only Sri Ramakrishna's theology, but Swami Vivekananda's revelation. Why would you want to serve the world as God unless the world was God? But there's no room for that in your Vedanta. In your Vedanta, the world is just illusion. It's just name and form. And then what? Now you say you are a person in the lineage of Swami Vivekananda? What do you know? You've never prayed to Kali. That's the thing. Kali, Tantra, Bengal, Eka Chakra, the bowels, Gaudiya Vaishnavism, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Nityananda. Like, oh my God, we've only barely skimmed the surface of the Ramakrishna Sarada Vivekananda heritage. This is our heritage, whether you're Indian or American or an alien. This is the heritage that we all deserve to inherit because it's universal, but its universality goes far beyond Vedanta. What Swami Vivekananda meant by Vedanta is far broader than these brainwashed Shankaracharyaites Shankarites can probably represent. Which again, Not bashing anybody. I'm just going on a rant a little bit, just for fun, just to kind of say like something is pushing through us, I think. And it is to make these tantras accessible in the way that the Upanishads were made accessible. It's to make tantric ideas and tantric modes of worship. Above all, it's to make the doctrine of the motherhood of God, to represent a woman's kind of spirituality. What about a spirituality that is sensitive to your cycles? What about a spirituality that takes into consideration embodiment? It doesn't just say, I'm not the body, I'm not the mind, I'm not the body, I'm not the mind. And at the same time, behind closed doors, you do things as if the body and mind are real. It's not something that you can just assert and expect to be true. It's something that you have to carefully work out through a lifetime of sadhana. And what does that sadhana look like? It's tantric through and through. There are people who take tantric diksha within the Ramakrishna Vivekananda tradition who have no idea that the diksha that they just took is tantric. They have no idea that the bijas that they're chanting are tantric. They have no idea that those bijas are Shakta bijas that Sri Ramakrishna realized through Shakta forms of sadhana. So it's important to remember that the Shankara Dashnami is but one lineage in Thakur, and that's a very important lineage, and it's already being represented. But it is not the only lineage, and I will die before that narrative comes to monopolize the field and hegemonize what we understand about Sri Ramakrishna. Other parts of his personality must be represented too, in tandem. I mean, we're not attacking the Vedantic, like Shankarite interpretation of Sri Ramakrishna. That's valid. We have to let that live. Obviously, Sri Ramakrishna was a person of many moods, and that was one mood, but it was not his only mood, And I will no longer tolerate this idea of monastics talking down to householders as if somehow householders are second-rate devotees of Sri Ramakrishna. Hare, if not for Surendranath Mitra, if not for Girish Chandra Ghosh, where would you be? Your direct disciples went to Girish Chandra Ghosh, a householder disciple, for advice. We don't come to you only. You sometimes must be humble and come to us. For because you wear ochre, it doesn't guarantee that your heart is dyed orange. Because I wear red, black, or white, it doesn't guarantee that my heart is stained by the dust of the world. You see? So the idea that monastics can look down on householders, the idea that Vedanta is somehow superior and that Tantra and Kali and the motherhood of God are all superstitions, this is a good fight. And again, we all have our swadharmas. Kayastas live for a fight, and I see a good fight. So here's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in talking about Kali in Tantra, in making the Tantras more accessible, and more importantly, in interpreting the Tantras along the lines of Vivekananda, Ramakrishna, and Sarada Devi. I want to point out that so much of their lives and their message and their practice was tantric in nature, not exclusively, but majorly. And I think that's, if anything, a mission to make the tantras freely available, to interpret them along the lines of Ramakrishna, and to distribute onto the many these ennobling and empowering ideas that for a long time have only been known to a few, that have for so long been shrouded in superstition and mystery. So this, I think, is worth giving my life for. And more importantly, it must be made freely available to all sincere aspirants of spirituality. But it's not my mission alone. That's why I don't like this word, my mission. You know what'll happen? If a person says this is my mission, then you know what they'll do? They'll start judging other people. And already you can see there's a tone of that coming out, even insofar as we try to articulate it. So as far as possible, I like to avoid that. I like to avoid talking about what other people are doing. Because again, that's already an expression of the Divine Mother Kali. Like they're doing that, power to them. What we're doing is not in competition with what they're doing. It's a very interesting idea. Since I started doing this 5 years ago, many people started to view us as competition to them. But we don't mean to be. We're just off in one corner talking about Sri Ramakrishna according to our own inspiration. And we don't begrudge anybody their way of approaching Sri Ramakrishna, and neither should they begrudge us our way of approaching him. Having said that, there are many ways to enter the many-roomed mansion of our father, of our mother, I would say. So, having said all of this, I don't like to talk about our mission. Because it's just something that will happen anyway as we respond to the call within us. It'll just come through. And if we talk about it, we then create the sense of us versus them. And that's what I want to avoid. There is no us. There's only Ma. And all of us are each doing what we can in each and every moment moved by our own swadharma. And all of that is just the divine play of Kali acting itself out on a universal scale. So having said all of that, the danger of having a mission is then you'll ask people to do seva for you. Like you'll ask them all to be part of your mission. And that's a problem. Even if you don't get seen as a business prospect, even if you don't get seen as a romantic prospect, you might still be seen as a means to an end by an egotistical spiritual teacher who has a mission. So the final point I want to make is that missions are very dangerous in spiritual life because they can give you a messianic complex. It can make you feel holier than thou. It can give you this kind of cause worth dying for and worth like sacrificing others for, which I think can be very, very problematic. You can be tricked into becoming like a servant for the rest of your life, thus suppressing your own swadharma with this kind of narrative of a mission. You see? So I'm very cautious of this word mission. I think it's better to say no mission, just play. Like we're all coming together, and the play seems to be making Tantra more accessible to others, interpreting it along the lines of Sri Ramakrishna, bringing back to the centerpiece the motherhood of God and embodied spirituality, etc., etc., etc. But it's just play. So, in closing, the final thing we should say in this very, very long, almost 3 hour lecture. Thank you so much, by the way, for your patience. This is the last in the triad. Next week, we're going to go back to some more philosophical stuff. So, now we've talked about the past, we've talked about the present. Here's the future. Let's not think about it. Let's honor where we came. Let's be fully present where we are. And let's leave it at that. Let's just come together every week for no particular reason, just because it's fun to do so, just because this is the best way that we can think of spending an evening. Let's not worry about like putting books together or starting institutions. Let's not worry about spreading the message or starting internet communities or like, having people post pictures of our murti or anything like that. Let's just relax. Let's just let happen what's going to happen anyway. No mission, no leaders, we're all equal here, no organization, there is no institution for you to donate to even, nothing like that. No money is expected of you. Give if you want to give, but what are you giving for? There's no mission to give to. Give if you want, up to you. But again, give between you and Kali. It's not about supporting a mission. There's no tides bowl that will go around. I'm not going to at the end of this lecture say, and here's how you donate. Be part of our mission. We're on a quest to make Tantra available to everyone with only a subscription of $7 on the Artha tier. You too can be part of this mission. Fuck all that. Like, what Ma Kali wants to have happen, she will make happen. If she wants me to do something, she will give me the money for it. She will give me the house for it. It's got nothing to do with me, and, hint, hint, nothing to do with you. Your only mission here, insofar as we're getting together, is to realize God. And so if I have a mission at all, it's this, to realize God. And I hope that's a mission that you also all share with. So fuck the institution, fuck the books, fuck fundraising, fuck preaching, fuck missionary work, fuck all these things that have to do with society and the world and the mission. Let's just love God together and let's just realize God together. Heck, let's recognize that we are God together. That's enough for me, I think. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanam Astu Shri Saradarpanam Astu Shri Vivekananda Arpanam Astu Jai Shri Shri Kali Devi Ki Jai. By the way, I'm so sorry, I have to say one more thing. Obviously, this bhava of like fuck the mission, even Swamiji had this bhava in Kashmir when he had a vision of the Divine Mother. Remember, after he did a homa to the Divine Mother in Shir Bhavani, he saw the Divine Mother Kali, who laughed at him and said, who's protecting who? Are you protecting me or am I protecting you? And so like that, all his nationalism, all his patriotism, all his self-importance seemed to dissolve in the face of that realization. So he came back to the houseboat, which he was renting in Kashmir. Funnily enough, from Swami Lakshmanju's family, right? Because they were in the houseboat business. But he comes back to that houseboat and he locks himself up in his room and composes the poem Kali the Mother. And they said, his disciples said that he was never the same after that. After composing the poem, he apparently like collapsed on the floor out of sheer exhaustion. And then he gathered marigolds and he started worshipping all the women on the boat, saying, no more Hari Om, now it's only Mother. And then he said, no more mission, no more patriotism. Like that, when he had a realization of the Divine Mother, he realized that we are but children, that Mother alone is doing everything. The Mughal invasion that destroyed Shir Bhavani, Mother alone did it. What of it? He surrendered fully. He had finally perfected surrender, arguably because the mission was finished through him. And so that's the bhava I hope that we're tapping into right now. The bhava of like, let Mother do what she will. And one more thing, the reason why this talk is so important is because tomorrow, I forgot to mention it, but tomorrow, you guys, is a big day for us. It's the full moon in the month of Jeshta, which is called the Snan Yatra. This was the day that Ma Bhavatarini of the Dakshineshwar Kali temple was installed. No Rani Rashmani means no Dakshineshwar. No Dakshineshwar means no Ramakrishna. No Ramakrishna means no Vivekananda. No Vivekananda means, this is Sister Nivedita. No Nivedita, but we can adapt that. No Nishant. No Katyayani. None of this. So this is an important day because it's in a sense the day that started it all. The day when Ma Bhavatarani was awakened. I like to think that this is the day when Mother opened her eyes in this world and with great delight decided to make herself known. For all this while she's been behind the curtain, waiting, 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 quietly moving her pawns, Ramakrishna, Sarada, Vivekananda, and now, finally, with the opening of the eyes in 1855 in Dakshineshwar, she decides to play. Ma has entered the chat, if you will. And so tomorrow we are celebrating Ma's more obvious entry into the world, whose reverberation we are all now just starting to feel and work out. Jai Ma. Jai Kaula Marga Ji ki Jai. Jai Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa Deva ki Jai.